Imagine the Possibilities is dedicated to empowering people to reach individual achievement across the spectrum of life. We believe in creating lasting relationships, empowering people for success, and cultivating joy. Our team of passionate people work each day to serve our communities in ways that create a lasting impact. We believe in creating opportunities for people with disabilities to achieve goals, build skills, and celebrate all that's possible. If you want to learn more about us or join our exceptional team, visit us at imagineia.org.
Pleased to be joined by former Iowa offensive coordinator, Coach Don Patterson. And before we begin our evening and this wonderful show that's been planned out, Don, we have to explain to people why we just went through about a half an hour delay. And I take great joy in this because we got everything figured out, but we were having some serious technical problems. Don, do you care to comment?
I don't even know enough to comment. I did feel like I was in mission control, and it might involve at least a moonshot, if not a mission to Mars. I wasn't sure.
What did you say to me before? You said you felt like we were trying to get into what?
What did I say?
You were trying to...
Oh, I know what I said. I felt like we were trying to break into Fort Knox. And we weren't having much success.
We got in, Don. We got in. We are here. We should have just said it was instead of an 8:35 start, we should have just said a 9:35 start. So
how about this? I feel obligated to our listenership. So if they want to go a while longer, Corey, cut them some slack. Maybe we need to do that.
Okay. Just so everybody's aware, we've got the line up on the screen, the phone line, and I'm still kind of working out some kinks here with the phone line. So bear with me just a second, but we are here live. The link for StreamYard is up and running. So if you, and I tell you what, Don, if this fly doesn't get away from me, I'm going to commit murder on camera. Okay. I'm going to murder this darn thing. I had enough of it. Anyways, we'll figure that out. But as it relates to, did I lose you, Don? We have you back. Okay, Don looks like he's completely frozen right now. Let's see if we can figure that out. I feel like I'm living in a Twilight Zone. Rod Serling better show up somewhere and tell me that this is an episode of the Twilight Zone. We're going to try to get Don back here, but as of right now, we're down Don Patterson. So again, this has been a weird evening. Thank you everybody for being extremely patient. Sometimes equipment just decides to stop working, and that's exactly what happened this evening. Everything stopped working. And apparently Don's device just decided to stop working. And on top of this, somehow there's a fly that's in my studio and irritating the living daylights out of me. Anyways, here's what we're going to do, folks. We're going to be talking Iowa, Wisconsin. We will try to get Coach Patterson back on with us. But in the meantime, I'm going to throw the link in the chat to join the show. If you have questions regarding Iowa's win and the season ahead, certainly join us. And I think we've got Don Patterson back. Coach, you're back.
Incredible.
Wait, listen, what is more incredible, this or the Iowa offense? Can you tell me that? Which one is more incredible? They're both unbelievable, but anyways. So Don, first of all, we got a couple of super chats to address. I'm going to try to get to as many comments in the chat since everybody's waited a long time. I'm going to try to filter through the comments, but at the same time, if you want your comment on the screen, you want to guarantee it's up there, be sure to leave a super chat and it throws it up on the side of my screen. So Lemansky says, shout out to the Hawk managers that defeated the Hawk Badgers in flag football. I didn't know about that, Don. I knew they did that every year. Was that a tradition that was going on back during your era?
I wish I could tell you exactly when that started. It's been going on for a lot of years, yes.
Okay.
But I don't know the first year. I'm guessing it's been going on for maybe 20-something years.
And appreciate the super chat, Lemansky. Mitchell, Corey is definitely trying to explain to a bird why she has to leave, and she just isn't getting it. I'm guessing this is when we were having technical issues. So, it's funny. I had our good friend Hawkeye Howard reached out to me during that. I just saw it pop across my phone, and he said, "You're late." And I'm sitting here thinking, "Well, yeah, I know I'm late." Thank you, Hawkeye Howard. I appreciate that. Thank you for the super chat, Mitchell. Lemansky adding in, good grief, Snoopy. I misplaced my laptop. So, well, you're here now, Lemansky, apparently. So whatever device you're on, we appreciate it. Let's go to our first caller here. Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson. Clayton is on the line. Clayton, welcome to the show.
Hey, can you hear me okay, Corey?
I can hear you.
Awesome. So I guess I'll keep it real short. I know that there's a lot of folks that probably want to talk to you, and hello, Coach Don Patterson. It's an honor to talk to you. But, you hear a lot about, the Iowa offense being terrible. But when you look at, Big 12 games, particularly the last several years, you see scores that are 45-41, and no one says a damn thing about the defense. So to me, I'm pretty happy with how the Hawkeyes are performing, given what we have. I just think it's interesting. I'd like to hear your take on, why is it that offense gets so much praise and defense gets none?
All I can think of is so many fans just relate to scoring. In so many sports, of course, it's all about putting up points or putting up runs in the case of baseball. So that's all I can think of is they somehow equate a low-scoring game to performance not well on the part of either team, I guess. That's certainly not true, of course, because defense has everything to do with the final score just as offense does.
That's really all I had, Corey. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you guys. I've been listening for a long time, and finally got the cojones to call in. So thanks, guys, for talking to me.
Please call back some other time.
Let me just add one more thing into Clayton. We appreciate your call, Clayton. I will say LSU is an example. I saw a graphic the other day. LSU is an example of kind of being the opposite. I know they're not Big 12, but they have statistically one of the worst defenses in the country and one of the best offenses. But I think those Big 12 examples you're bringing up, although those are good examples, Iowa's offense has been so egregiously bad per the numbers. I don't know that those Big 12 teams you're talking about have had there's been anybody that has one of the top 10 best offenses in the country and the worst defense. But you're right, the strength of the conference traditionally has not been defense, and obviously the strength of this conference has been. But yeah, that's a fair. I think it's a fair estimation what Coach Patterson said too. It's just how people like points. They want to see. It's an entertainment business, and Iowa football is not real entertaining. But the fans like yourself and like myself and Don Patterson, we'd much rather see an ugly win than a pretty loss there, because there really is no such thing as a pretty loss.
I totally agree, Corey. And it's kind of painful being a Hawkeye fan sometimes because you don't get to see that offense. But I have a lot of pleasure in watching the defense do their thing. So as long as we're getting W's, being a Hawkeye fan I'm 36 years old, so haven't been around as long as Coach Don, but I got no problem with watching the Hawkeyes and seeing them do their thing on defense and winning games.
Amen. Thank you for calling.
Appreciate it. A lot of different ways to shoe a horse.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. By the way, Erica, thank you for the super chat. T. Hink was about to do a wellness check for you since he also lives in Ames. Glad it's all good. Appreciate our listener, T. Hink, and Erica. Thank you for that. Several comments here early on that we want to get to, and we do want to take a moment in just a second to thank our sponsors, because They're the reason that we're here. So first of all, comment from one-loss parlays. This is an interesting question. What happens if Penn State beats Ohio State, Michigan beats Penn State, Ohio State beats Michigan, and Iowa beats Ohio State in the championship? And this is an interesting. We've addressed this question. I've talked with Mark Rogers about this very topic. It got brought up with Tom Kakert on Saturday, Don. It's possible that you could have, and it's probably not likely, but it's possible that you could have 3 one-loss teams from the Big Ten East, only one of which would represent. If Iowa somehow upset that Big Ten East rep in the championship game, what would the playoff committee do? You'd have a 12.
That the Eastern representative has one loss, as do we.
Correct.
But in terms of degree of difficulty, their schedule certainly would have to be classified as tougher than ours, right? Those 3 teams.
Considerably, yes.
Or for that matter, what if it is Penn State? Penn State's thinking, wait a minute, we beat them 31-0. That doesn't count anymore. My suspicion, maybe if we beat the Eastern representative, the Big Ten wouldn't have a representative. And I say that just anticipating that there might be 4 other teams that are no losses or 1 loss that would have certainly played a much tougher schedule than ours.
Okay. So you're saying you think that you're saying the Big Ten might not get a team in if there's a bunch of teams with 1 loss?
Well, let's face it, if those top 3 in the East all beat each other, they're all going to drop in the polls. They're no longer even, some of them might not even be top 10 teams after that, right? But we're suggesting that all 3 of them are 11-1 in the regular season. Could happen. That's a nightmare for the Big Ten. First off, who represents the East? I don't even know how they put that out.
See, I tend to lean the opposite direction. I don't think it's a nightmare for the Big Ten. I think it's a nightmare for the playoff committee because I don't think the Big Ten's not. I don't think the Big Ten is going to be left out in that scenario. I don't think you can leave a 1-loss Ohio State team and a 1-loss Penn State team. I mean, you just can't do that. If anything, the Big Ten might be the first conference to get 3 teams in the playoff, which would be unprecedented for a 4-team playoff.
I would suggest there's no way there'll be 3 teams from one conference in the playoffs out of 4.
Well, if there's like I say, 3 1-loss teams in the East, and their names are Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and the SEC has got a bunch of 2-loss teams, maybe 1 undefeated team in Georgia, and the Pac-12 is beating up on each other. I think the Pac-12 might be the best conference, but they may not.
Let's not forget that Washington certainly might finish unbeaten too.
You're right; they could. No, this is why we need an expanded playoff. I mean, because there are scenarios like this that haven't transpired. Now, everything may work itself out, and probably it will. But
this is the perfect time for me to mention, Corey, expanded playoffs I'm good with, but not to 12. It should be 8.
Yeah,
and
I
you
agree.
know the reason why. No one should get a first round bye.
I'm fine with 16. I know that 16 lengthens the season.
I'd be okay with 16. I'd prefer just 8 because I don't want it to be that easy to make the playoffs.
Right. So in other words, again, Iowa beats Ohio. If Iowa goes 12-1 and wins the Big Ten title, Don, are they in?
Did we beat them 7-6 or
7-6?
35-7.
7-6. Let's be reasonable.
That's good luck with that argument that we're in.
Okay. 12-1 Big Ten champions being left out. That would be.
I'd assume that we blow away these next 5 opponents, or are those all 1-score games also?
Well, what do you think? What's reasonable to expect? Do you expect Iowa to blow out anybody the rest of the year?
Well, we need some help probably to do that.
They didn't blow out Michigan State. They didn't blow out. They blew out Western Michigan. Didn't blow out Utah State. Certainly didn't blow out Iowa State or Purdue. So I expect almost every game down the stretch, Don, to be close, and I expect Iowa to win almost every game. They might win every game. It's going to be hard to win out, especially playing a bunch of close games. But Iowa also knows how to win close games, and we haven't previewed Minnesota yet, Don. I expect Iowa to beat Minnesota on Saturday.
And one thing you've heard me say before, Corey, this is a good time to bring it up. Any game is 3 games within 1. It's offense, our offense versus their defense, our defense versus their offense, and kicking game versus kicking game. And you've heard me say, Corey, if you win 2 out of those 3 matchups, you typically win the game. We're proving that. We're proving it week after week. We're winning with our defense. We're winning with our kicking game, and that's usually enough for us to skip on by.
KH says we need to push Tory Taylor for Heisman. Have you ever seen, has there ever been a punter that's even been in the conversation? Certainly, I'm guessing there's never been a finalist. Although now Kinnick punted, right? But obviously he played multiple positions. Are you aware of any, was Reggie Roby ever on anybody's radar?
Well, before we start pushing Tory for the Heisman, we need to come up with a couple of fake soft punts. One involves Tory throwing a 60-yard touchdown pass, and the other involves him running 80 yards with the ball under his arm. If he can get that done, then he might win the Heisman.
Well, Tory needs to learn how to throw a football first, because I still don't know if he knows how to do that. But question in the chat here from, let's see, ZGA Wags. He says, Coach and Corey, I've had friends of mine on both sides of this, would like your take. Do you think the hit on Eric All was dirty, or was it just Hill threw him into a bad spot? I heard the same thing, Don. Several people came to me and said it looks like a dirty hit, low hit. Just your thoughts on that hit that might cost Eric All the rest of the year. We don't know.
I don't know that it was a malicious hit. I wasn't surprised. I'd have been shocked if they would have flagged the guy for the hit. It brings up a good point. If you were going to ask me tonight, what are things that Deacon can work on? One thing would be, and I think you've heard me talk about it before, Corey, if you're talking about being a really, really accomplished quarterback, then those particular quarterbacks can play an entire football game and never put a receiver in position that he's hung out for a hard hit. And you see some of the NFL guys do that on a routine basis. You see a few college quarterbacks do it, but the really good quarterbacks understand I do not want to put my receiver in position where he gets hit in the teeth, or for that matter, hit in the knee. He should have time to gather himself and protect himself. So if you're talking about working from one defender, let's imagine a drive route, which is what that was. He's running across the field. As soon as he clears a defender, and long before he gets to the next defender, that's when you throw in the ball, so that he's got time to protect himself. And he didn't have much time. Matter of fact, that's very similar in a way you think about it to Luke's play. Luke didn't have a lot of time to protect himself either. So that's something for Deacon to work on. And I'm not trying to blame Deacon for the injury. I'm just simply stating that's one of the finer points of quarterbacking, is to try to be sure that your receiver selection does not put a receiver in a position to need an injury timeout. Ideally, he's got time to catch it and then prepare to deal with the tacklers that are coming at him.
And for the record, Deacon was not the quarterback that threw the pass to Luke Lachey, but he was.
That's correct. Or another way to think of it, imagine a tight end running a middle route, Corey. You know what a middle route would be. Imagine two deep safeties down the field. The middle route, in theory, splits those safeties. But I always told the tight ends and the quarterbacks, I want you to err on the side of being a little bit closer to that near safety than the far safety. And the reasons are kind of obvious. The near safety can only hit you in the back or in the side. That far safety can hit you in the teeth. And you don't want those kind of declators. If you can avoid them as best you can. And so for that reason, the receivers and the quarterbacks understood that the sweet spot between those safeties was a little bit closer to that near safety than the far safety.
I want to take a moment to thank Iowa Smokehouse sponsoring the show all season long. Tasting is believing with this great Iowa company. You can satisfy your snacking needs by visiting iowasmokehouse.com and ordering their beef jerky, meat sticks, steak bites, even their ketchups, barbecue sauces, and salsas, everything you need for game day, quality game day living. Use the code Hawkeyes at iowasmokehouse.com for great quality products. Also, Brad Van Meter and his team down at State Farm. Give him a call. Get yourself a quote on great insurance rates. And auto rates have never been as low as they are right now, according to Brad. So definitely give him a call. Check him out online, www.bradvanmeter.com. His phone number is 515-256-6480, regardless of where you live. Give him a call and see what he can do for you and your family. 515-256-6480 for great rates, courtesy of Brad Van Meter down in Des Moines and State Farm. All right, let's go back to our chat. A couple of super chats coming in here, Don. One being Lomansky says, wasn't Reggie Roby a first-team All-American? Badger Pod referred to him as the Ray Guy of college football.
The answer to that is yes. He was first-team All-American. Lomansky, he still owns the NCAA record. The record is 49.8. That's a record that stood for a long time. I believe that was fall of '81, if I'm not mistaken. And that doesn't mean that Torrey is any less a punter than Reggie, because what a lot of people aren't aware of is that Reggie did not pooch punt. For those that don't know, a pooch punt would involve a punt from the plus side of the field. In other words, we don't have a lot of field before we get to the goal line. So Reggie didn't punt those. We had another punter to punt those shorter punts. And as you know, that's one of the best things Torrey does. It hurts his average every time he punts one of those balls from plus territory, but he's really so adept at spinning the ball backwards, as you know, and giving you the effect of a 9-iron or a wedge coming into a green. He can back the ball up in many cases, and he's done it any number of times.
D. Rollison in the chat. Don't like getting blown out by Michigan, Penn State, Stanford. Well, I don't either. I don't think anybody does. I don't know if this.
We can all agree on that.
Yeah, I don't know if this is in reference to the college football playoff conversation, but yeah, I don't think anybody. Obviously, the 31-0 loss to Penn State, how you lose and how you win is important as it relates to the playoff conversation. So when we say a win's a win, and I'd rather win ugly than lose pretty, that's true. But it can also be true that when you're weighing resumes, the playoff committee is going to look at how Iowa looked in certain games, whether they be wins or losses, and how they lost at Penn State will hurt them. I mean, it's going to. They didn't compete in that game at all.
No doubt. Just for the sake of argument, let's say there are 8 teams with 1 loss or no losses. The first thing they're going to do with those 1-loss teams is see if anyone has a decisive loss, and they're the most likely to be eliminated. And of course, that would probably fall under the category of our game against Penn State.
Mitchell in the chat. Thank you for the super chat. Mitchell, probably a sore subject, but with Brian Ferentz, how many points per game does he need to get to a 25-point average? Do you and coach think it's even possible? Is it possible? Well, anything's possible. 25 is not some insane. Well, but Don, they're not getting it to 25 points per game.
As you know, well, we're sitting at 146 right now. So figuring on 13 games, figuring on 325 points, that means we would need 179 points over the next 6 games, right? We're talking about a 13th game. So we need to average almost 30 points a game for the next 6 games. And that's going to be a challenge to get that done.
Okay, let's go back to our phone line. Josh is on hold. Josh, welcome.
Hey, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Thank you for calling our Iowa Smokehouse phone line.
Yeah, it's my first time calling in. I've recently been watching you guys. Love the content. I just had a few quick questions. I don't know too much about the Hawkeyes as compared to you guys. So Brian has that 25-point average that he needs to hit. Do you think so? How much say does he have in calling those plays against Wisconsin? Because if he's running on 3rd down and he's trying to score 25 points per game, do you think Kirk has a say in the strategy and you would think that he would want to air the ball out more to reach that,
My guess, Josh, is, and I don't know this, but my guess is if Iowa was ever concerned with the 25-point per game thing, my guess is they're no longer, because I think Brian and Kirk are very intelligent and realize that it's not feasible for them to do that anyways. I think, and the way they played Saturday was the way they needed to play, Don, to win that game against Wisconsin with the situation they have at quarterback right now, the passing game that's completely non-existent. that's how they were going to win that game, is by running the football and just winning on field position. That's why it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6 from midfield. What are they going to do? They're gonna run up the middle. They're okay with punting on 4th and 1, 4th and 2. That's fine, because we're going to pin you back and you ain't going nowhere, because you got a backup quarterback in the game and an offense that's been sputtering. Is that fair, Don?
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was a well-called game from Kirk, just, punt deep, trust the defense. And just one more question. So, Corey, your stance on Kirk is that you want him out, right?
No, that's not my stance on Kirk. My stance on the situation with Brian is they need to make a change. And even though I agree with the people that say, hey, the offense is going to be below average as long as Kirk is here because of how he runs the system, I do believe that they need a new play caller. And I felt that for a long time. If Kirk's not willing to make that change, I believe Kirk needs to go. Yes. But I'm not firing Kirk. I'm telling him, hey, yeah, as the AD or as the administration here, we are making the call that Brian needs to go. Now, I know a lot of people who really get angry when I say that, because they say, well, Kirk's like a CEO. He should be able to do what he wants with his company. This is a public university. Kirk Ferentz does not own Iowa football. So even though, yes, I believe that he has every right to create his own staff, if somebody on the staff is failing or not doing their job well, he does not own the program. So that's how I feel on that subject. I want Kirk to be able to retire when he wants to retire, but he's got to do what's best for the offense. With that being said, at 6-1, I said it at the outset, they're going to go 10-2, 11-1 this year. I'm confident in that. If they go 9-3, I'll be disappointed with the schedule they have remaining. The floor should be 10-2. And Don, you may not agree with that, but they should be 10-2 at a minimum. And so if they're 10-2, they're probably still going to make the Big Ten championship. That's the thing. If they're 10-2, they're in to the Big Ten title game, because Wisconsin's going to lose to Ohio State. I'm pretty confident in that. And so unless somehow, what's Nebraska's record? I guess Nebraska could beat Iowa, and they've got 2 losses in the conference. Am I correct in saying that, Don?
Maybe someone has a mathematical chance other than
Sure.
us in Wisconsin, but it would require an unusual circumstance for anybody else to be that representative.
Right. So that's where I stand. I love Kirk Ferentz, Josh. It's nothing against him. That's where I stand. I'm tired of the offense, but a lot of people are. But they win games, and for anybody that calls me a hater, I went all the way up to Don. You know this. This weekend was very busy for the both of us. I was in Madison, and I drove back home to Ames. Then we were in Iowa City, back in Ames now. We're doing the show tonight. So, believe me, I'm loving the 6-1 start. But is it sustainable? That's a different question.
Yeah. That's all I have. I appreciate it. You guys have a good night.
Thank you, Josh. Don, do you agree with that? That 10-2 should be the floor now, given the rest of the schedule and the other teams in this division and how they're playing?
Well, I agree with the announcers the other day. They showed the schedule, the remaining regular season schedule, and they said not hard to imagine that Iowa might run the table. But then, having said that, they said it's not hard to imagine that all of those games might end up as one-score games. And there's some truth to that too. So I'm sure the way our team's looking at it, that very thing, we have a chance to win them all, but to win them all, we have to take every last preparation as seriously as we did the last one. And we need to play with that same effort and enthusiasm against all those remaining teams as we had for Wisconsin. If we get that done, I think we do have a great chance to run the table.
The number to call in is 515-635-1601, 515-635-1601. And we've got Scott calling into our Iowa Smokehouse call-in line. Scott, welcome.
Hello.
How are you?
Scott, how are
Good.
you?
Yourself? So,
Doing good.
yeah, regarding that Eric Hall injury, I remember listening to Tom Brady years ago saying his responsibility isn't to put receivers in harm's way. So, yeah. But anyway, I got a a statement about the defense, and then I do have a question about the offense. So, like, I don't know if you on Saturday, Corey, you had a post-game podcast, and I don't know if you were reading a message or somebody had called in saying that Wisconsin's offense looked terrible, and you kind of replied saying that Iowa's defense just makes teams look bad. And I was listening to the post-game press conference with Luke Fickell, and he complimented the Iowa defense, and then he then a reporter asked him, "Is like, do you feel you had a good offensive game plan coming into this game?" And he says, "Yes, I thought we did really well the last couple of weeks for practice." But then he said something. He's like, we didn't recognize how good Iowa's defense actually is." And maybe I'm misinterpreting, but it almost sounded like our defense is actually better in person than what they could derive on tape.
I didn't hear that from Luke Fickell. But I did watch. Don, I don't know if you caught it.
It was a transcript. Go ahead. It was like a transcript where, or he said something about. Yeah, I could be wrong too, but it almost sounded like he said we didn't recognize how good they were.
Okay. So real quick, I didn't hear that or didn't read that, but Don, I was going to mention the BTN published a little segment with Urban Meyer where they were walking before the game last week, where they were walking through the Iowa defense and what makes that Iowa defense so good. And he made a couple of comments that stood out to me, but my overall takeaways from that breakdown was probably what you have seen with this Iowa defense for years under Kirk and under Phil Parker and under Norm Parker. They don't necessarily have the best athletes. So I could see how potentially when a team is scouting Iowa and watching them on tape, maybe they don't stand out or pop off the screen because they don't have a ton of guys who are bigger, faster, stronger, great athletes, but they're just so sound all the time and they're in their spots at the right spot at the right time. Am I right in saying that, Don? That could be kind of deceiving on tape?
Absolutely correct. And furthermore, it's kind of obvious too that we play with great discipline. And I'm talking about it shows up in so many ways. You don't see a lot of late hits. You don't see us guilty of encroachment very often at all. You don't see pass interference a lot. We play a clean game on defense, and we don't get dead ball fouls. We just understand how to play, and it all starts with trying to be sure you don't give any ball carrier a two-way go. And by a two-way go, I mean someone on just about any play you ever see involving an Iowa defense, there'll be two potential tacklers, one with inside leverage, the other with outside leverage. So the ball carrier invariably finds himself getting sandwiched between two tacklers. And that's the secret to our success. Very seldom does a defender get isolated so that the back has a chance to break either way. There's always help coming from left to right.
And they tackle really well because I watch a lot of football teams from other conferences, and it seems like a lot of times the defensive player tries to go for that highlight hit where they'll drop their shoulders and just hit them as hard as they can, but they don't wrap up. And sure, if they hit them, if they have a great contact, they can knock them into the stands. But if you miss, I mean, that running back or receiver is going another 20 yards, whereas Iowa, it seems like once they get their hands on you, you're done. You're not going another inch.
And I will say Iowa, it seems like, Scott, to me, Don's in deep thought about what you're saying, obviously. But what it seems like to me is when those misses do occur with Iowa, and I'm talking specifically like Xavier Wampa, a couple weeks ago had one where he missed. It stands out because we're just not used to seeing that. Like you said, everybody's so sound. So that's credit to Phil and just the defensive culture that he's created.
And even the whole philosophy of swarm, even if a player does miss, there's 5 other guys that are going to hit him.
Right. Yeah.
But because I remember a few weeks ago, the Iowa State game, when talking about so Iowa State, it was 20-6. and they weren't doing much. They were doing a lot of these very short swing passes. And one of the announcers was saying that, man, Iowa State really needs to generate a big play. They got to really attack downfield. And the other announcer kind of chuckled, and he's like, but where? Where are they going to go? And it just, anyway, I thought that was kind of funny how, anyway. But I do have a question about the offense. So with about Iowa was ahead 12-6 against Wisconsin. We were it was about 4 or 5 minutes left in the game. We had the ball. We want to burn clock and basically just get some first downs, get out of there. We don't want Deacon Hill throwing the ball at that point because we don't want interceptions. But yet it seemed like we won 3 plays right up the middle, right where all the defensive players are, the linebackers. We go 3 and out. We punt the ball, which, our defense, rises to the challenge. But I'm thinking, and then, we get the ball. I think we forced a turnover. We get the ball back. And I think we did get at least 1 first down, but we just run it right up the middle again. 3 and out. We punt the ball back. And all it takes is 1 missed block, 1 missed tackle. As good as our defense was playing, it feels like our defense has to be on top of everything 100% of the time. And Wisconsin, their offense wasn't doing anything against us. But, hey, it only takes 1 big play. And now, since we're only, 6 points. So my question is I don't want to throw the ball to get a first down. But where are the jet sweeps or the reverses or something? Because if we had just gotten a couple of first downs, we could have iced the game, and we wouldn't need to.
Right now,
Scott,
they don't have an offense that they can count on to make a simple 5-yard pass. That's where we're at with the passing offense right now.
But because that Weejet kid is super fast. I mean, where's that jet sweep where you don't pass it? I totally agree with you, but you got you don't need to always stretch it vertically by passing, but the football field is what, 30 yards from east to west, so stretch it that way, get to the edge. Just something to kind of pull that defense apart so maybe we can run it up the middle. But it's almost like you feel that, they just want to run 3 plays and punt it back to the defense.
Yeah.
And they're not even – it's like kind of maddening anyway.
Your take on that, Don?
Well, you're right about one thing. Against Wisconsin, we were almost exclusively running north-south plays. We were hitting between the tackles pretty much all day long. It didn't produce a ton of yards, but let's not forget, the 82-yard run was one of the simplest plays in college football. It's what we used to call 43 pop-out, or you heard it referred to as an ISO play. We actually had a fullback in the game. He led up on that play side linebacker. We blocked the guys that we needed to block fairly well. We did motion a wingman over across the formation, you might remember, which took his defender with him. That took him a little bit out of the play. He's one of the guys that had a chance to make an arm tackle, but LaShawn was strong enough to pull through that tackle. And then the safety took a poor angle. And let's give LaShawn credit for having a really good stiff arm on that play also. And then we're off and running. But that was a simple play. That was an inside play that went 82 yards. And there were other inside plays, more often than not, our counter. And one thing we did very well, you guys might have noticed this, or if you go back and watch the game, you'll see it. There are a number of plays, let's just say for the sake of argument, they're designed to go off the left side of our offensive line. And if it looks a little bit bottled up, you saw our backs routinely bend the ball back away to the backside, as referred to it. If the ball is meant to go left and it bends away from the left back toward the right side of the formation, That's simply the backside of the formation, and they were not sound with their backside alignments and charges, and that gave us a chance to break off some pretty substantial runs away from where the ball was really supposed to go.
But because because like even that 82-yard run by LaShawn, did Wisconsin make a big mistake on that run play?
Not really. Play side,
when they
the fullback did a decent job on the near linebacker. The other guys from center all the way over to tight end got their blocks fairly well, and then we're off and running. Just took probably a corner. I forget the number. The man that went with the wing back, which was another tight end, he motioned across the formation, and of course his man coverage went with him. And now we're getting back to part of the problem of man coverage. You remember me talking about sandwiching the ball between two defenders? Those are zone concepts. Obviously, when you're playing man coverage, it's kind of hard to keep that kind of continuity in your back end, because clearly you have to defend the guy you're manned up on. And for that reason, you're more susceptible to big plays, I think, when you're in man coverage. That's the beauty of our zone defense. Right now, I think we're leading all of college football in not giving up very many 20-yard plays. I think we had 9 going into the game, and Wisconsin got 1. That's it. We only got 1 also, but at least we were even on explosive plays.
Yeah, because I noticed that a lot of teams don't even attempt those big plays. But yeah, just like that Iowa State game, I mean, there's just nothing there. Because I was listening to a Wisconsin podcast, and they were like upset that Wisconsin never really even attempted a lot of big plays. But then I'm like, yeah, because there's nothing there.
And it was worth 44 yards.
Well, yeah, there was that one. But
one problem with calling plays that are designed to go way down the field, you have to have enough time in the pocket to be able to throw them.
I thought our defensive line, I don't know, can't remember I don't know how many sacks they got, but I thought they got a lot of pressure.
Believe it or not, we only
quarterbacks were running for their life.
Lost that particular stat, but how many hurries did we have? My gosh, too many to count.
Yeah, but anyway, going back to those final 2 possessions. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I'm not an offensive guru, but you just feel like they're not stretching the field horizontally as much as they should, or even doing like a misdirection, like a reverse or something like that. Because
that old term, playing in a phone booth. You felt like we were
exactly, and I understand that's kind of Coach Ferentz's. They want that, but I'm just like, because this defense, Wisconsin defense, is not the Jim Leonard defense. I don't think.
Real quick, I want to add this in. Wisconsin was dead last in the Big Ten in pass offense heading into this game.
Pass defense.
I'm sorry, pass defense. Dead last in the conference in pass defense. We threw the ball for 35 yards.
I think it was 37 for Adidas.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to wait another time to mention this, but while we're talking about Deacon Hill, so he's doing poorly. Against Purdue, he was 6 of 21. Saturday, it was windy and rainy, so okay. But he threw 6 of 14. Yet Kirk Ferentz won't bench him for one of the backups. Whereas a lot of other so for example, if LaShawn Williams fumbles the ball, I mean, they're going to bench him. That doesn't mean that LaShawn Williams is never playing again. Later in the game, he'll come back in. And I understand, like, the quarterback position is a unique position that you're the de facto leader of the team. But, if you're 1 for 13 against Purdue, for example, with an interception, Kirk Ferentz seems to be under this impression that if you bench him for poor performance, you'll shatter his confidence and he'll never be able to play again. And I was listening to a podcast with Tom Kakert and Chuck Long, and he even brought up this idea of replacing the Deacon Hill, even if maybe Joe Labus isn't ready, or maybe Marcus Lanez. And he kind of said, hey, Deacon Hill might surprise you if you bench him for, if he was amped up against the Purdue game, take him out of the game, tell him to calm down, and you never know, he might come back into the game and actually surprise you. So it's kind of maddening that, a quarterback can complete 40% of your passes and never get pulled. I don't know. That's just my thought. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I can see why you might have that opinion.
So,
Um,
all right.
Yeah. I can't argue. You're right. If a back coughs up the ball one time, he's probably going to come out of the game. But he's going to, assuming he's been running hard. So let's face it. Sometimes it's just a really well placed, well timed hit that the ball comes out.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen a back that's never fumbled. I mean, and you got to give some credit to the other team for trying to generate a fumble. A lot of defensive players will try to spike the ball out, and obviously, if you're able to hit that ball, much as a volleyball player spikes a volleyball, there's a chance the ball will come out if you can put your fist on it. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and if other players make mistakes or is playing really badly, pulling them, for a while and then putting them back in, and Corey, I was saying, why doesn't Kirk Ferentz ever pull the quarterback for poor performance?
Listen, I don't even ask that question because we went 3 years with one quarterback who was consistently bad, and we never saw Kirk pull him because of performance.
Yeah,
so
I know.
I'm not even asking that question 2 games in with the Deacon Hill.
Yeah.
You want to know what I actually think? You want to know what I actually think? This is my bad boy side of me, Don. I would like to just say, let her rip. Let's get Marco out there. Just let her rip. Let's just see what we got here. But I know it's not going to happen, so I'm not going to come to the show and yammer about how it should happen, because a lot of people are going to disagree, and certainly Kirk's not going to do that. But I'd love to see Marco Lanez in there right now.
I shouldn't even be asking that question either, because I know the answer. He's not going to. But for reference,
let's just go back to Western Michigan. Would it have been such a tragic thing if Marco Lanez got a few snaps against Western Michigan just so we could see what he might do in front of a crowd?
But the fact that he did not against Western Michigan when they're up 30 is an indication to me that there's zero chance he sees they could be losing 50-0 and Deacon have negative 50 yards through the air, and freshman Marco Lanez ain't ready.
Nope. And for reference, Nick Saban, I think the first game, he went through 3 quarterbacks in one game, and they were winning. But the quarterbacks weren't doing well.
There was a guy named Hayden Fry that did that in the Kickoff Classic, you might remember. We had 3 quarterbacks. They all played about 20 minutes. And Hayden simply stated, we're trying to figure out who the best quarterback is. And some people were critical because they felt he treated that Tennessee game. You might recall the Classic was kind of a big deal. It was one game in advance of all the other games in college football. And it was an honor to play in it. But Hayden treated it as a non-conference game because actually that's kind of what it was. Of course, it was against Tennessee one time, or that particular game was against, well, it was against Tennessee the more I think about it, not NC State. We actually played in 2 of those games. It's a real honor to be invited to play in them. Very few teams ever got that opportunity.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. That was all I had.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate the phone call.
By the way, the 3rd quarterback in that Kickoff Classic was a guy named Chuck Hartley, who became the starter a few weeks later and went on to all Big Ten status.
I'm just curious, have you ever had conversations with Kirk about his philosophy with quarterbacks? Why does he have such a different mindset with playing younger guys? And because Hayden Fry seemed to have the opposite. You guys seem to have the opposite mindset. You want to get young guys experience. And you've talked about it seems to be equal performance level, like 2 guys who are probably about the same as far as execution right now, what we're seeing in practice, we're maybe going to go with the younger guy because he's got more potential, more upside, more room for growth, where it seems like with Kirk Ferentz and the staff traditionally in the last 24 years, they'd rather go with the older guy.
Right.
And I think the reasoning from the outside perspective, it seems to be, well, he's older, he's paid his dues. And I don't know if that's what the response would be. And that'd be a good question for Kirk. And if I get a chance to ask him at a press conference, I'd love to ask him that question. But have you ever had conversations with him about this difference in philosophy with younger players?
No, we've really never discussed it. You've heard me, Corey, as a head coach. I would remind our guys in the early season, 2 weeks ago, you were agonizing over who the starter was and who the backup was. So I just want to remind you, here in September in particular, and all those warm game dates, don't hesitate to play the second team here, because sometimes you'll find out there's that old term, some people are gamers and some people are not. There's some truth to that. Sometimes you find out that the backup is actually the better player. And it's kind of hard to know that. You always heard me talk about equal reps against equal opposition. That's what scrimmages should be all about. If you're having a good battle going, give equal reps against equal opposition to both players. And then you'll have a better idea of who's better than who.
Don, I love the fact that Mark Rogers is in our chat, because he says Iowa needs Penn State to win the East and get a rematch win. And I agree with that. I actually had this thought yesterday. I was thinking, if you're talking best case scenario of 12 and if you're not guaranteed to get in the playoff at 12-1 as a Big Ten champion, the team I want to see is Penn State, because although it doesn't erase the 31-0 loss, it could potentially change the narrative and the perception of Iowa if Iowa goes back and beats them. Whereas if they beat Ohio State, Michigan, good win, but look what they did against Penn State. So I think if you're Iowa from here on out, we ought to be rooting for Penn State. We ought to be rooting against Ohio State this weekend, rooting for the Nittany Lions to run the table all the way to Indy. And then Iowa get a rematch with them. Even if you think they got no chance, they have just as good of a chance against Penn State as they do against Michigan and Ohio State. So let's see the Nittany Lions again in the playoff. Or in the title.
I agree with you. The argument we can make at that point would be, look at how much we've improved since September.
All right, Lemansky with the super chat. Gentlemen, with a weak offense, Deacon needs great play calling. I worry about a quarterback fumble or a pick six. Are my worries unfounded? Protected Deacon from Badgers late in game evident to me. Well, our previous caller, was it Scott or a caller before that, brought that up? I mean, the margin for error is so slim, Don. And that's why, from my perspective, it was obvious on 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7 from around midfield, they were going to run the ball down the stretch every time. Whereas maybe they have the tendency to do that anyways when they're ahead in the game. But with a quarterback they have little confidence in, an offense that's just not very good through the air, they're just not going to take any chance of a pick six or a strip sack. They'd rather give the ball to LaShawn Williams and tell him, hold that ball like it's your baby, like it's your child. And even if you get back to line of scrimmage against stuff, that's okay. We're going to punt. Wasn't that kind of the feel you got as the game was going on Saturday?
Yeah, you might recall in the late stages of the game, as careful as we were, we still had a problem with an exchange between center and quarterback. And Deacon correctly simply got on the ball, because the mistake would have been trying to pick it up and advance it. He didn't do that, thankfully. But we all but had the game won, and all of a sudden the ball's on the ground. And thankfully got to it with anybody wearing red and white.
Question here in the chat from Esther, talking about the injuries. How many injured players do we have now, and how would you evaluate Deacon Hill through, 2 starts, 2.5 games? Don, first of all, in answer to Esther's question, we're going to get some clarity tomorrow on Eric All, I'm sure from Kirk Ferentz. I know there's been speculation about potentially season ending. They're obviously down Luke Lachey. It sounds like he might potentially want to be back for a bowl game. We'll see if that happens. Both, by the way, Eric All and Luke Lachey both have eligibility to come back next year if they want. So that's substantial. We know Cade McNamara has said he wants to come back. And they're also down Addison Estringa. TJ Hall is out right now. Deshaun Lee is out. So they are banged up at a couple of key positions.
I am confident that TJ will be back next week. The only reason I say that, when I saw him on Wednesday, he had, I won't be specific about his injury, but it was a lower extremity injury, and he was not practicing. And I said, TJ, are you okay for Wisconsin? And he said, yes, I'll be fine, coach. It's just a precaution. And in the end, he wasn't okay. I don't even know if he made the trip. But I do suspect, since he was telling me he was confident he would be clear to go for Wisconsin, the fact that he wasn't would certainly indicate to me he's going to be available this next week.
And I made the comment, Don, on Saturday that there's no way you toy with the idea of inserting plays for Cooper DeJean on offense if Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall are both out. I agree with that because they have no depth back there. But they can get
Right.
those two guys healthy. I'll go back on my stance and double down on that. I still think that's worth toying with.
It would be a thought for December 2nd. It would be a thought for the bowl game, but not until then.
Jack says, I agree with Coach. Feth was a man like I haven't seen him be yet. Rusty Feth, Don.
Right. I give credit to all our offensive linemen for playing better than they've played. I think it's the best game we've had. I know it's hard to measure that from one week to the next. The thing that I noticed in the second half, and of course you noticed the same thing, Corey, if I'm not mistaken, 14 out of Wisconsin's first 17 plays were pass plays, which is odd to me because I have a lot of respect for number 0, and I think you do too, rightfully so. He's a load to have to tackle, and yet early in the first quarter, they didn't hardly give him the ball. Now, maybe because he was a little bit nicked up going in, I guess. Maybe that's why they were trying to eliminate a few hits on him. But in the second half, it was obvious in that third quarter, they had a philosophy, we're going to try to run the ball down Iowa's throat. We're not sure we're good enough to do it, but we're going to try. And that did work for them to some extent. Both their scoring drives were in the third quarter, as you know. And the thing I was glad to see, it seemed to me, as our offense watched Wisconsin commit more to the running game, I thought you saw an enhanced version of Iowa offense in the running game in the third quarter also. Not just on the part of the ball carrier. I made a comment in my notes. I said, LaShawn cannot run better than what he's running right now here in the third quarter. He was running like he was on a mission. He was running very much like number 0 from Wisconsin. And that guy's going to get drafted, I think, pretty high on draft day. So he was running with a purpose. And furthermore, I thought our linemen really took it as a challenge. We've got to be able to control the line of scrimmage because it's obvious that Coach Ferentz does not want to throw. We don't want to take chances in turning the ball over. The safest thing we can do is try to run the ball up and down the field and grind out some first downs and burn clock. And put a lot of faith in our defense, obviously, in our kicking game.
So Jack wanted to know that very thing. What happened? What was so different about the running game on Saturday? Just guys starting to click, and obviously more counter auction, less inside-outside zone. What have you seen as the biggest difference maker with some of Iowa's? They haven't had success in every game, but certainly Saturday was probably the best performance of the year given the opponent.
Well, probably if I had to pick one scheme that works well for us, I think gap schemes are probably number 1. You hear the announcers talk about our counter a lot, what we used to call rumble. That's a good play. You're pulling an offside guard and you're having a second puller. And so much of the time it was number 83 when he was healthy. He'd line up as a wingback and be the second puller, or he might line up as an offset fullback and be the second puller. And he was pretty effective doing it because he's a better athlete. We used to do it with our tight ends, even if they were aligned adjacent to the tackle. We pull the guard and the tight end, thinking that the tight end was a better athlete than the tackle. The traditional way to run counter to the strong side of the formation or the weak side is to pull guard and tackle. And while I'm thinking of it, we actually saw Iowa run counter by pulling guard and tackle in this game. I think that's the first time I've seen it all year. But we're just trying to give them different looks, different blocking schemes, all involving the counter play. So that play was good to us. It's been good to us all fall. It's the most reliable running play we have. But as I mentioned, we ran a simple isolation play for 82 yards one time. And you also see what we call power. which is somebody kicking out of the end man of the line and then the offside guard pulling. And then at the point of attack, we're doubling down again, as we say. We've got a guard and a tackle that are working from a down lineman up to a linebacker to be able to account for those two. But trying to drive a hole in the line of scrimmage, of course, and hit that hole with a lot of power, a lot of force. And people that are critical of us running north-south need to realize, and the best example I can come up with is LaShawn's numbers, 174 yards on 25 carries. And to those that say, well, 82 was on one carry. Okay, let's factor that out. That still leaves 92 yards on 24 carries. That's almost 4 yards a carry. That's pretty good. That's a lot better than we've been doing. So let's give some credit to the O-line for maybe being a little more forceful at the point of attack, and let's give a lot of credit to the guys carrying the ball. And LaShawn gets more credit right now than Caleb does. Caleb had some good plays in there too, and certainly offered LaShawn good relief. That's one storyline, is who's our starting running back. It's certainly not guaranteed to be Caleb, because based on Saturday afternoon, you'd have to say it was LaShawn. That's a good problem to have. We have two backs that we feel good about.
I think Jazz is the best well-rounded back on this team. I think right now we're just not, he's not healthy. We haven't seen that. But I think he runs with the best burst. But LaShawn has really impressed me in recent weeks. And the one thing I made a comment to you the other day is it seems to me that that Caleb lacks the quick twitch. And that's one thing I just wonder, a guy his size, is that something that can be developed, Don, or is that just something, hey, some guys have it and some guys don't? Because some big guys like Braylon Allen, he's got quick twitch. For a guy his size, he's got quick twitch, but it doesn't appear to me that Caleb does.
Yeah, I'll say it this way. There are things you can do to improve your quick twitch, but fundamentally, I think a lot of it's just hereditary. Tim Dwight was born with fast twitch muscle fiber. Now you can, and the only way to improve your speed, I know a little bit about track and field. The only way to improve your speed, and for that matter, your football speed, of course, which is thought of as 40-yard speed, the only way to learn how to run faster is to practice running faster. I know that sounds silly, but it's the truth. So it's not going to do you any good to go out and run distance. You got to practice quick twitch activity. You got to try to become a more explosive player, and more explosiveness equates to more fast twitch muscle fiber. And the prime example was that 82-yard touchdown. If you look at it, he was clearly under control in the backfield. He actually hesitated for a split second, but then when he went with all he could go with. He went with a lot of speed and quickness. So he delayed, and then he accelerated through the hole. And by then he was off and running, and thankfully did a nice job of stiff arming that last potential tackler. And then he did pull through a guy way downfield that would have been able to tackle him short of a touchdown. You've heard me say before, Corey, if you think that doesn't matter, I saw somebody the other day that didn't even make a good effort on a ball carrier that was way down the field. Can't remember who it was. I believe it was a DB from Illinois, as I recall, against Maryland. And it was a poor effort, because I think you might remember us talking about the bowl game against Mississippi State. They had a running back that went about 80 yards, and I don't recall who the DB was, but it was a great effort. He had to leave his feet. He had to die for all he was worth, and even then he barely nipped the guy's ankle. You know what the rest of the story is? The guy goes down to the 5-yard line, 4 plays, they have to kick a field goal. And it sometimes is the difference in the game.
Don, I think we lost Don for a second. Wow, this has been one of the strangest evenings as it relates to technology. I mean, I'm telling you, folks, this was not the issue we were having earlier. This is just a recurring theme this evening. Technical problems. We're going to get through the show, Don, I promise.
Let me guess, you lost me at the worst possible time. Nobody heard the end of the
You're correct. You were talking about the Mississippi State tackle. It might have been Matt Hankins, but I don't remember.
You remember the specific play I'm talking about, though, Corey?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, right near the goal line.
And here's a prime example in this game. I don't know how many times. It was amazing what Castro was able to do. I actually wrote them down. I don't have time to go through them all now, but I could if you wanted me to. There were any number of times, Corey, I'm talking about critical downs. 3rd down and 8, they gained 7. 3rd down and 6, they gained 5. And several times it was Castro with a great open field tackle, and he had the guy around the ankles to pull him down. And that guy was typically Braylon Allen, he's a load. If you don't believe he's a load, just ask our free safety about having to tackle Braylon Allen. And of course, Schulte's a very sure tackler, but he even pulled through Schulte a time or two also. It was impressive that he could break Schulte's tackle. I lost you, Corey. You're offside.
John, he trucked Quinn Schulte.
Oh, I was trying to be kind.
And that was, let me just say this, that was a run. We were down, so we were on the sidelines. We were on that side of the sidelines, that side of the field. And that runs like that could have changed the game because they're down. I believe they're in the red zone at that point. Didn't get into the end zone, but the crowd really got behind their team after that run. And that's one thing I watch that, and I hate comparing backs, but when I see the size of Caleb Johnson, I wish that he had a little bit better quick twitch. And I wish that he was able to lower his shoulder pads and run through people like Braylon Allen does.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like he does that. Not that he's afraid of running through guys, but he doesn't welcome contact. He's a lot easier to bring down than Braylon, from my perspective. Is that fair?
You've heard me say this about Cedric Shaw. What made Cedric? Is Cedric still the all-time leading rusher? I don't know if he is or not.
I believe so.
He's up there. What made him such a good back is imagine you're a tackler in the secondary, you don't know which version of Cedric Shaw you're going to get. Cedric, as you know, was a track athlete too. He could put his foot in the ground and run away from you. And he did that, it seemed like about half the time. And there were other times, if you try to be loud on your feet to be able to tackle him in the open field, there were times also when he simply dropped his shoulder and ran through the tackle.
Right.
And that's effectively what Allen does too. Allen actually has pretty speed and quickness. If he wants to try to run away from you, he can. But you first and foremost better get your pads down to take on a 250-pound running back. And when you're squatting to take him on, that makes you more vulnerable, of course, to a foot in the ground and a chance to run away from you. So it's hard to know how to approach a guy like that because he beats you two ways.
And LaShawn Williams was our RTI Threads player of the game. He had 25 rush attempts for $174, including that 82-yard touchdown rush. And, man, he's had a couple of big ones this year as far as long runs. And I find it interesting that this comment in the chat, this is a fair description. Christopher says, I heard the run game described by Tyler Tashman, who's, I believe, the new Des Moines Register beat guy, says he described it like a piñata. We run over and over for 2 to 3 to 4 yards, but eventually, hopefully, it explodes. How do you feel about that analogy, Don?
Well, let's face it. When you see it, let me just imagine you read about a team that averages 5 yards per rush. That sounds pretty good, right? Well, the reality is it doesn't all come in the form of gains of 4, 5, and 6. Sometimes it's 2 and 2 and 3, and then it's 28 and 34. So you are looking for consistency. You've heard me talk about first down runs need to gain 4 yards. That's the standard.
Right.
And for that matter, if it's 3rd and 2, you only need 2 yards for that to be an efficient run. So the challenge I'd say for Caleb is to become a more efficient running back. By that, I simply mean a higher percentage of plays that meet that 4-yard standard. It's better to be consistent with your gains rather than feast or famine.
All right, let's go back to our Iowa Smokehouse call-in line. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson. Who's on the line?
Hi, this is John. Gentlemen, how are you?
Good, John. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Coach Patterson, I'd wanted to ask you this since the beginning of the season. When a player cramps up during the game, do they do blood work on them afterwards to see where their levels are at, or do they just tell them drink as much as you can the next 24 hours?
Well, first off, if somebody cramps up during a game, you can bet they're being hydrated when they get to the sideline. They're hydrated. And we always told our guys, listen, don't wait until you cramp. At that point, obviously you need to be proactive. You need to be hydrating all the time when you come off the field. Just a little bit every time you come to the bench. and that'll give you a better chance to avoid any cramps at all. So frankly, on a warm day, it's hard to do that. But we're so far into the season now, cramps should not be an issue this time of the year. You need to be properly hydrated going into the game, and you need to be sure to hydrate throughout the game too.
Okay. Is there a situation? This might be the dumbest question in the history of the podcast, but is there a situation when we're back in the shotgun, it would be better to have a 6'5", 250 pound fullback by the quarterback versus a 6 foot, 180 pound tailback to block for him?
Can I answer that, Don? Let me
Sure.
my adolescent knowledge. Well, first of all, if you have you had Hayden Large back there next to Deacon Hill, you might as well just go empty and admit that you're throwing, because nobody believes you're running out of that. Nobody believes you're running the ball with Hayden Large. At least if you go shotgun with LaShawn, you give the illusion you could run, Don.
That's why you recruit a fullback, like a guy named David Hudson years ago. David Hudson, I'm proud to say I recruited him out of Waxahachie, Texas. He was a 62-foot shot putter in high school, so clearly a very explosive player, very explosive athlete. He was a fullback, and yet he was a high school running back. So when he came to Iowa, we loved to spend time with David in the backfield, because you might assume it's a pass play because you got the fullback in the backfield. The R-back maybe's motioned out of the backfield or lined up in a slot. But the truth is, we could go one back with David in the backfield and still have a really effective running game, because the guy was a 1,500-yard rusher as a high school senior. And David Hudson had a really good rushing average all the way through. There was another guy that you might remember, Corey, if you're old enough, a guy named Kent Call. Kent Call was a very explosive fullback that was a little bit small for fullback position, but he was such a great runner, and he was a really tough, hard-nosed guy. He could get the job done. He only weighed maybe 230, 225, 230, but he was an outstanding runner that also could still handle any and all pass protection. So those are the best fullbacks, guys that are a real threat to run the ball.
Is it odd to you that we haven't seen Hayden Large get a handoff at any point? I know he's 6'5", but wouldn't that be nice to have a fullback that you could at least?
Well, it would be a key breaker when I remember in the spring game or maybe in August at kids camp, we did throw in the ball a time or two and he caught it. I think he's simply not perceived as a very effective runner. So we'd have an element of surprise, that's for sure, if we gave the ball to him. Lou Montgomery was another fullback you might remember, Corey, that was an outstanding runner and still handled blocking very, very well. So our old 21 personnel, that fullback was a good runner, and we weren't afraid to give him the ball. You remember the really old, remember the rolling ball of butcher knives. His name was Richard Bass. Now, he didn't carry the ball that much, I'll admit, but he would tear you up as a blocker because he was only about 5'11" or 5'10", but he was strong as a bull, and he would run through you. We've had a lot of good fullbacks like that back in the day, but they were not the oversized person that Hayden Large is. They were obviously more explosive than Hayden Large. Hayden's got size to his advantage, but he's obviously not very quick and not very, very athletic compared to a smaller player.
Okay. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, John.
You bet.
All right. We're going to go back to our Iowa Smokehouse call-in line. Thank you for calling Iowa Postgame with Coach Don Patterson. Who's on the line?
Hey, Corey. How's it going?
Good.
Good. Sorry, you're a little quiet in my ear. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Great to be talking to you guys. I just had a couple notes on the game.
Okay.
First one was I actually got the chance to go to the Badger game. Man, those people they're great people, bad football fans. I went with 3 Badger fans, and we showed up 3 minutes before the game started, and ended up being like 10 rows from the front, and it was just like, wow, we're coming late, and then leave after the third quarter. And they said the people that I was with said that they a lot of people stayed for, like, in comparison to other games, and it was just super interesting to me. The other thing that I had was, doesn't Jay Higgins kind of remind you of like a Luke Kuechly? Luke Kuechly, the way that he like pre-snaps, the way that he's like reading the offense and being able to just be so aware of what was going on. I just thought think so highly of him and think that he's going to do great things the rest of this year and into next year. That was all. I'll get off the line.
Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate the call. Yeah, that's an interesting comparison. I've never heard the Luke Kuechly comp for Jay Higgins. I don't know how much you watched Luke. I'm trying to think. Were you still coaching when Kuechly was?
I must have been. I'm
Okay.
not
That's an interesting comp. I wouldn't be one to be able to comment on it. I will say that I'll comment on the fan thing, and to our caller that just called in, appreciate him calling in for the first time. I was at that game as well as in Camp Randall, and I made the same observation. The students get there late. Now I was there. We drove up, Don, and we got there. We got in our seats within like 60 seconds of the game starting. I mean, it was like we timed it just perfectly. But there was a line, and I'll tell you this. Let me tell you something else. Let me give all Iowa fans who are watching this podcast the key to getting into Camp Randall. When there's a line that goes, about a block back, go over to the will call window. All right. You don't have to pick up a will call ticket. You got your ticket on your phone, whatever. Go to the will call window, and there's a gate by the will call window. They will scan your ticket, even if you don't have a will call ticket. So I can tell you this, Don, we were standing in line, and line's barely moving. There's just hundreds of people out there trying to get in at this gate. And I said to my wife, I said, walk over here real quick. Went over there, and sure enough, they scanned the ticket. So I motioned her over, and what do you think happened? Flood of people came behind us as they saw us get in. So, and then you walk up those ramps, Don, just back and forth up the ramps. You better hope your ticket's down by the field because you're going to be walking a mile.
Yeah, I remember Camp Randall pretty well, although I never sat in the crowd. But I did think it was interesting. I heard the same thing. You always heard me say, if we're playing at UW, I hope it's an 11 o'clock kick because I know the students are going to miss the kick. And the other thing that surprised me, I did hear people comment that after jump around, a lot of the students at that point take off.
No, I observed that, Don. It was a 3 p.m. kick, and the student section was not full. And then it was not full in the fourth quarter. I just don't understand that. That makes no sense to me.
Well, that tells me that we should be even more appreciative of our fans than what we sometimes show, because our fans are so wonderful. I think they feel like I do. I feel like I am wrong if I'm not in my seat before the game starts. I want to see the band perform pregame. I want to see the flyover. I don't really care about seeing the pregame warm-ups, but I very definitely want to be there in time to watch the band and the Palms perform, and then, of course, be able to hear the national anthem. And I do appreciate the fact that our team is always out for the national anthem. That's what we do. Some visiting teams choosing to not be. That's fine if that's what they want to do. I guess that's okay. But to me, part of the experience is to be out there for the national anthem.
Pavel in the chat, glad you found a quiet surrounding this time. So real quick, I want to address this. Jared, no laughing kids tonight. I went back and kind of went through some of the chat on Saturday. I want to make something clear. Those were not my children. I was in a public lobby somewhere, okay, in Madison. I'll say that. Those were not my children. Okay. So I'm glad the kids were happy. I guess it would have been worse if the kids started scream crying, Don. But I just found it interesting. There was this massive lobby, and I went to one corner where it was a workstation. And what do you know? A couple people show up with some young children right behind my chair.
And these are people you don't even know.
No, absolutely not.
Well, wasn't it kind of obvious that you were conducting some kind of...
Yes, absolutely.
I think that's very rude on the part of those particular people.
Some people in the chat thought it was humorous. I was a little bit aggravated by it, but we made it through, Don, and it's been a weird couple of days of just everything.
Well, I'll go on record as saying I was aggravated also for having to listen to it.
You did listen to that, you heard it.
We were driving back from Kansas City. We listened to it, and I have to admit it was annoying because it interfered with your conversation.
I mean, and when I say that I'll say, I guess we can comment on it because I have no idea who the people are, and they're, I'm not gonna name them by name. The mother of the children was almost back to back with me. Like, this is a huge lobby. She sits down right behind me. And, I understand you got kids, and I can't relate to that, Don. Maybe
Clearly
hard
a
to
Badger fan.
but
A Badger fan that knew that you were black and gold.
that's right, Badger fan. So appreciate the comment, Jared. But I just want to make clear that those were not my kids. And again, our RTI Threads player of the game for Saturday, LaShawn Williams, 25 rushes, a $174 with an 82-yard touchdown rush. And Don, I could have went a lot of different places with my player of the game. Sebastian Castor was really, really good.
Yeah, you're hard pressed to not name him too.
I know.
Both those individuals had outstanding games.
And Don, I'm hard pressed not to name Torrey Taylor. By the way, a guy
You're
who
right.
goes over 500. Was he 500, 600? He's over 500 yards punting.
506. You want to bring that stat up too for our listeners, or you think they're already?
We brought it up the other day that I was the only team in the FBS with more yards punting per game than offensive yards, and that only increased on Saturday. only grew.
Yeah, we need to be sure Torrey didn't have 10 opportunities to punt, because that means he's going to put up 500 yards.
Incredible. So yeah, all three. How about that, Don? We had a clear star in every aspect of the game: offense, defense, special teams. So even though the offense wasn't great, you did have a standout in LaShawn Williams, and the offensive line looked good. That's good. That's a good sign, as opposed to just, hey, the defense won a game 7-6, but basically got absolutely nothing from the offense. You can't say that. When you look at the run game was effective against a traditionally strong Wisconsin rush defense.
Yeah, I made this observation, Corey. I identified 7 plays that were huge within the entire game, and you can, off the top of your head, almost identify all 7 of them. I do recall 4 of them were on defense. 2 of them were in the kicking game. Those are obviously the 2 field goals. And to those that say, well, why are the field goals such a big deal? Well, if you're ahead 7-6, a field goal is huge, because a 4-point lead is entirely different than a 1-point lead. They have to score a touchdown, and then, of course, we go from 12-6 to 15-6, and now it becomes a 2-score game. So outstanding on the part of our place kicker, and we all know Bruce. I don't know anybody in college football I'd rather have kicking for us than him. That's a real compliment to him. But let's not forget, he routinely puts the ball in the end zone on kickoffs too. And then beyond that, the other big play clearly was our 82-yard run by LaShawn. So here's my point. How many big plays can you name on the part of Wisconsin? We had almost all the big plays. You have to say their pass play to Green for 44 yards was a big play, but you're kind of hard-pressed to name more than one. We had the 2 turnovers, they didn't. We had the safety, they didn't. We had they did hit a long field goal that was nice. I give the guy credit for that. Incidentally, Corey, I'll ask you about early in the game. We passed up a chance at a long field goal. I do recall, correct me if I'm wrong, we would have been kicking into the wind from 49 maybe, or 50. I'm talking about when we went for it and failed on 4th down.
Well, let me tell you something, Don.
I remember the yard line. It's 4th and 3 at the +32. Go ahead.
The comment was made by Iowa's starting kicker pregame that it was actually easier to kick toward that side of the field.
I know the wind can be tricky in a big stadium.
The wind was slightly in the face of the kicker going that direction, but it was also a bit of a crosswind, left to right. And let me just make clear, Drew Stevens made that kick late in the game. What was the distance on that kick?
It was 48.
The same exact distance, Don, as the first one they passed up.
No, that one would have been 50, probably. It was on the +32. But only 2 yards.
Well, +32, then, okay, 49.
Well, we're typically 8 yards back, especially on those longer kicks. We're going to be spotted at 8 yards.
Okay. Well, the one late in the game, the 50, if we call it a 40, you said a 47, 48 yard field.
48 officially.
That was good from 60. Just so I'm gonna make that clear. That would have been good from
And
60.
the announcer made that same comment. That would have been good from 60.
The decision to pass on that field goal early in the game, I don't think had anything to do with distance. I just don't. I mean, I don't know what the decision. I would love to ask Kirk, why'd you decide to go for? Was that a hard decision? I have to think that was a difficult decision. Don, it was 4th and 3. It was not 4th and inches. It was 4th and 3. And
that was not that late in the game. That was first quarter, right? Because we were driving to the lead.
It was 0-0 at that point.
And maybe late in the first quarter, I believe.
My mindset there in the stands was kick a field goal. Let's get the lead.
Well, let's face it. We haven't exactly been stellar needing 3 yards on a critical down.
Well, that too. But it's I have confidence in Drew Stevens from 50. And he proved that later in the game.
Do you recall the play we ran?
Was it a reverse or not a reverse? It was a run
reverse to Allegheny for -5.
Yeah.
And we run the reverse earlier. Matter of fact, the reverse earlier wasn't very much earlier. That was the reverse by Seth Anderson for a gain of 16. But here's the truth. That play looked like it was only going to gain 4. Seth Anderson had yak yardage of 12 yards on that play. He pulled through a tackle that should have been made. And so it was an outstanding run by Seth.
Don, I think he's being underutilized right now.
Well, that would suggest we need to find ways to get in the ball, even if it's a short throw.
If Caleb Brown is being underutilized, and that's probably fair regardless of what happened that led him to being gone from the team a week ago. He was there in Madison on Saturday. He was suited up. Based on talent, he's being underutilized, severely underutilized. Seth Anderson's being underutilized as well. That kid's got talent. We're going to be right back with more Iowa postgame with Coach John Patterson. We'll take a quick break. Our phone line is open, 515-635-1601, 515-635-1601. You can also join by clicking the StreamYard link in the description. We'll be back with more Coach Patterson, myself talking Iowa football after this.
Imagine the Possibilities is dedicated to empowering people to reach individual achievement across the spectrum of life. We believe in creating lasting relationships, empowering people for success, and cultivating joy. Our team of passionate people work each day to serve our communities in ways that create a lasting impact. We believe in creating opportunities for people with disabilities to achieve goals, build skills, and celebrate all that's possible. If you want to learn more about us or join our exceptional team, visit us at imagineia.org.
Appreciate Imagine the Possibilities, and also want to extend a thank you to RTI Threads. They're carrying the Cooper DeJean official apparel. Be sure to check that stuff out. Don, I lost you, Don. Don is totally gone. I can't hear him. You're unmuted, Don. I think, Don, I think you're having an audio problem here. Let's see if we can get you back. You might have to leave the studio and come back, Don, because you are MIA. I want to make sure everybody else can hear me in the chat. Let's just make sure that I'm audible in the chat, folks. Can everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up in the chat if you can hear me, folks. Pretty sure Don his audio just went kaput, I believe. But I need a thumbs up in the chat if everybody can hear me. Yes, everybody can hear me. So Don, your audio just went bye-bye because everybody in the chat can hear me. So you might have to leave the stream and then come back in if you can by way of your email. Okay, RTI Threads, Cooper DeJean. Check out the apparel. Check out the merchandise. Visit cd3lacesup.com, the official partner of Cooper DeJean. And they've also got deals with Zach Lutmer, Carson Shire, Aiden Hall. Their NIL roster continues to grow. Check out their assortment at www.rtithreads.com. Again, that's www.rtithreads.com. All right. Let's go back to see if we've got Don back. Don, can you hear me? Don's still gone. Okay, we'll see. We'll see if we can get Don. We'll see if we can get Don figured out here. And let's see. Let's get back to our chat here for a moment while we're waiting for Don to figure that out. And Don, if you can hear me, Don, go ahead and exit out of StreamYard. Come back in by way of your email. Just leave the studio completely and try to enter because I think your audio just completely dumped. and I hopefully he can hear this. But anyways, all right. Thanks, Don. All right, Erica in the chat. Why in the world don't we ever sneak deke? There were some plays where that would have made sense. 3rd and 1 or 2 or 4th and 1. We have a 250-plus quarterback. Use him. Well, that's a fair point. The 4th and 1 late, and I understood Tom Kakert's perspective on that play, that you're just trying to get points and just get out of there with a win, and you'd rather be up 2 scores than take that risk. And I understand that. But certainly 4th and 1, you would think with it, yeah, that's fair. With a 250-pound quarterback, a center that you're comfortable with, a line that's playing well, plus a fullback and Hayden Large at 6'5", whatever he is, that they can get half a yard to a yard whenever they want. Certainly go back to the Nate Stanley era, they were able to do that. Mitchell wants to know, thank you for the super chat, Erica. Mitchell wants to know, what are the sponsorship costs? Where can I find that information? Let me throw it up on the screen, Mitchell. It's on the bottom ticker there. That's the email. Reach out to me by email, and I'll give you the information. From the Eye of the Storm at Outlook.com. Again, that's From the Eye of the Storm at Outlook.com. All one word. You can also reach out to me by Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Again, if you're interested in sponsoring the channel, advertising here from the Hawkeye of the Storm Iowa postgame with Coach John Patterson, or any of the content here year-round, again, it's From the Eye of the Storm at Outlook.com. All right, we're still waiting for Don Patterson to jump back with us. Kevin wants to know, is a playoff still 4 teams? 4-team playoff this year, Kevin and Jared. 8-team playoff is not occurring. They're jumping to 12, and that's why Coach P does not agree with that. And I would tend to agree, because of 12 teams, you need a couple teams that have a bye, and we have 4 teams with a bye, right? That is an unfair advantage. I understand that they've earned that bye to an extent, but boy, a bye in football is a big, big deal. It's not like a bye in basketball, or, I know major tennis tournaments, players will have a bye in the first round, and smaller major tennis tournaments. Not the same thing with football. So that does give the team with the bye a significant advantage. So either go to 8 or go to 16. I know that's Don Patterson's stance, but that would be my stance as well. And I think Mark Rogers agrees with that. He brings up in the chat, Mark says, Ohio State was left out in 2018 as a 12-1 Big Ten champ with 4 top 15 wins. That was the year. So it is possible. I mean, it is possible. And I guess if there's going to be a team that does it again, it would be in Iowa from the Big Ten West. Played a terrible schedule. Didn't really beat anybody that impressively. And possibly you're facing 2 to 3 teams in the East that have a better resume. That would be the worst case scenario if Iowa's 12-1. But Iowa, you can't really worry about that. The only way Iowa's going 12-1 is by winning the way they're winning. They just don't have the offense to change that. But it looks like they've got a good enough offensive line right now. It's not great, but a good enough offensive line where they can run the ball effectively or semi-effectively here and there. Hopefully that can be consistent. We'll see if that's carried over to the Minnesota game on Saturday. Their defense has been down this year, but certainly with the defense and special teams of Iowa, that they can win all these games in their schedule moving forward. All right, we've got Dave on the line. Dave, welcome to our Iowa Smokehouse call-in line.
It's everyone's favorite Gopher fan. How's it going?
You're here, Dave. What do you think about the game this Saturday?
Yeah. It's going to be a game of which quarterback shows up and doesn't crap the bed.
Okay. So give us the lowdown on the Minnesota quarterback.
Ethan Kelly-McManus is really young, really exciting, a good future, needs to learn certain things like not throwing the ball as hard as you can during like check downs and screen passes. Don't really need to do that.
Okay.
I would say Brandon Stanford has probably had a really bad year compared to where a lot of people thought he was going to be. Definitely a guy that
so that we know
the tight end.
Okay.
The tight end.
Oh, Stanford. I'm sorry. I thought you said Stanford. Yeah, Brevin Stanford. Okay. He's had a bad year?
He's just a couple key drops. Just really, really down this year for where expectations were at for him. Only being targeted maybe 3 or 4 times. For a tight end, for a team that doesn't really pass the ball that much, that's not a very good thing. There's not much of a difference between the Minnesota offense and the Iowa offense. I think the Iowa offense is just, the wide receivers are just not as good as Minnesota's wide receivers.
I'd rather have. By the way, right? No offense to Deacon Hill, I'd rather have Nathan Calimanis than Deacon Hill. And I looked
Deacon Hill. Watching him, man, I watched both of those games. I watched both of those games when he got to play, and he looks like a poor man's Mitch Leitner. Big kid, can't really throw the ball that much on target. But, it's basically a running back that can throw. That's the way I would look at Dinkin. It's just he's a running back that can throw the ball. Wide receiver-wise, I've seen so many drop passes from your guys. That's something I would be very worried about. But the big thing is the Minnesota defensive backfield has been also the Achilles heel. They've been really have a lot of struggles outside of Taylor Newbin and Wally, a corner. We really don't have anyone in the backfield that is really, really good. They're all very young defensive backfield play. Hopefully,
real quick, Dave, I just want to put you on pause, Dave. I think we have Don Patterson tied into the phone line now. Don, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
This night will end, Don. Just remember that. This night will end.
Is this Plan C or Plan D? I've lost track.
I think we've gone through the alphabet. But anyways, Minnesota Dave is on the line with us. He's giving us kind of a scouting report of Minnesota, and he's talking about their struggles, both on offense and on defense. So, Dave, I'm looking at Big Ten stats right now. And for anybody that doesn't know this, Minnesota, traditionally a really strong defense. They are 12th in the Big Ten right now in total. I should say scoring defense. Total defense, they're 13th out of 14 teams in scoring defense. They're also 12th out of 14 teams in total offense. They are a little bit better in scoring offense. They're seventh in the conference in scoring offense. I'm looking at conference-only stats. So before I get Don's take, Dave, where has the drop been overall? Has it been from what was lost to the NFL draft this past year?
Draft,
basically
players leaving, going to other schools, NIL problems, things that you have to deal with because of the new system. There were guys that weren't playing all that much, but they were the type of guys that you expected to be starting this year, but decided to leave and go somewhere else because for some reason, you know how it goes. I don't like it here. I'll leave. I don't like it here now. I'll leave.
Don, I don't know how much have you seen of Minnesota this year? I mean, they got trounced by Michigan a couple of weeks ago, and
they just choked the game against Northwestern. It's awful.
Yeah, the Northwestern game is not. You give up.
Yeah, that's the game. That's the game that ended up counting as more than one loss, I think.
Yeah, that's like several losses. I'm still hurting after that.
Yeah, you've heard me, Corey, talk about it. I was so proud to have a prediction model that predicted the winner every time a year ago. And when you know it, the one game already this year that did not hold up for was Minnesota at Northwestern. How do you get beat 21-0 in the fourth quarter to Northwestern? It shouldn't happen. And anyway, it did. And Minnesota managed to lose the game, even though they won the majority of those 5 parameters. So it's rare that of course, if you lose in the fourth quarter 21-0, that's a bad sign.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I did appreciate, Dave. I did hear your comments about your quarterback. And we have some of those same issues, of course, with Deacon. Young quarterbacks, it takes them a while to understand touch. and they're so proud of their arms, and rightfully so. But the best quarterbacks, of course, understand that if you can take a little pace off the ball and put it on target, that's a good thing. If you can make it a little more catchable, that's something that's very definitely worth doing. And it sounds like the Minnesota quarterback has some of those same issues that Deacon has had so far.
Oh yeah, yeah, very much so. And Don, to basically talk about the Northwestern game a little bit here to integrate. The reason why they basically lost that game is they decided to play prevent defense. And if anyone can tell you anything about prevent defense, it prevents you from winning.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some truth in that. You still have to, and a good example, of course, is Phil Parker for how we finished up against Purdue. The previous possession, Purdue had gone down the field and scored. And Phil Parker said, "We're not doing that again. No more base defense. We're gonna mix in some pressure, and they got good results." And we did it against Wisconsin also. He wasn't afraid to bring pressure from time to time, and it has a good effect, of course, if you don't wear it out. If you just pick your spots, and Phil has a good knack for knowing when to go with pressure.
Yeah, that was the big problem with Minnesota. They decided just to rush 3 the whole entire time in that fourth quarter. Pretty much thought they had the game win, and Northwestern was just like, okay, I can just sit back, and the quarterback's sitting back in the pocket. I can just throw to anybody. And anyone that's like slightly open, I'm just going to throw to them, and if they make the catch. And they, like I said, our defensive backfield is still very young. Like I said, there's only maybe 2 guys that are really reliable. Is our safety, Tyler Newbin, and Wally, the corner.
Yeah.
But Evan Spanford is a really good tight end. I don't know. I mean, I haven't watched him enough this year to be able to. You're saying he's not maybe.
He's dropped so many passes this year. This has been a really down year for him. Not targeted all that much. He dropped, I think, 3 passes, almost in a row in the Nebraska game at the beginning of the year. And every time he gets targeted, a lot of it's not just him. Like you say, your quarterback doesn't learn touch, and he's trying to chuck the ball to the tight end on a screen pass or just a check down route, and it will hit off his hands and go right into the defensive back. That's where most of it's probably 3 of Kelly Manick's passes have been basically rifle passes that hit the wide receiver or hit the tight end and end up going to the defensive player on the ricochet.
Yeah. Yeah, and those tip passes invariably end up in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, I appreciate you calling in, sir, and I hope you're going to call in again after the game on Saturday so you can talk. Hopefully, we're talking about a good game. But
a good game for me. I don't get to brag about how good we are. It's been a while. Iowa has been lately PJ's Achilles heel. So hopefully, finally, fix that heel problem.
Thank you for the call, Dave, as always.
Okay, talk to you later.
All right, Don, a couple of things in the chat. We've got Trevor on hold. I'm going to keep it to the StreamYard line now that we've got Don on the phone line. So if you want to chat with Don here, last few minutes of the show, you can do that by means of StreamYard. Click the link in the description below, and you'll sign in to either YouTube or Facebook, and then you can join the show and ask Coach Patterson a question. Robert wants to know, Coach Patterson, it seems like the D-line is lining up about a yard off the ball. What is the strategy behind that?
Well, one thing you see, we've used any number of stunts where, more than maybe we ever have before, we've used 5- and 6-man pressure. And the 5th and 6th rushers typically are our 2 linebackers, but they don't often rush in traditional rush lanes. You'll see movement up front. You'll see a linebacker sometimes wrapping around as a contained rusher, as the outside rusher. And then a guy like Joe Evans might be beating a tackle inside when the tackle didn't expect him to go inside. Of course, Joe's been injured some and hadn't been as productive as he was when he was more healthy. But the point is, we've used some imagination with how we're rushing the quarterback. It's had an excellent result, and I'm sure it's going to continue. So Phil's done a really nice job of knowing when to pressure and when not to. And in general, we've gotten good results when we have. We haven't gotten great pressure out of our traditional four-man front, if that's the only 4 rushers. But that 5th or 6th rushers made a difference. And you saw us use guys like Sebastian Castro coming off the edge. Or let's not forget, the first big play in the game was a cornerback lightning by Cooper that produced a -2 on 4th and 1. That was the first huge play of the game, because that could have been, if you want to think of it this way, that could have been a 3-point play, because the fact that they went for it on 4th and 1 and we stopped them, that also eliminated. They were in easy field goal range at that point, and you could argue that that tackle for -2 was worth 3 points, because the scoreboard did not change by 3 points as it probably would have if they'd have kicked.
And Don, William wants to know, what do you think about going to a 2 running back formation?
Well, I already 2-yard touchdown. Oh, 2 running backs. I'm
2
sorry.
running backs.
You don't mean running back, fullback.
They
there's
have
some
done
thought
that.
for that.
They've toyed with that in the past. I think going back to the
Yeah,
Mekhi
usually-
Sargent Goodson era.
Usually when you see something like that, most often it would be out of the gun. You know, you'd have both our backs sitting back there on either side of you. And you can obviously mix in some misdirection when you do that. You can be faking to one back and maybe handing off to the other back that's crossing back across the formation, so you can get some misdirection like that. You could also simply fake to one back coming across the backfield and maybe hit the other back coming out of the backfield in that same direction. That's a possibility. There's all kinds of screen possibilities you could go with too, where you throw the ball, behind the line of scrimmage to either one of them. So that, if you use your imagination, you can come up with some viable plays with 2 running backs in the game. Absolutely true. And let's not forget, it's easy to break that 2-back set, meaning 2 running backs with the quarterback back there. You can always motion one of those backs out of the backfield to create your traditional one-back offense.
Comment here from Brian. Appreciate the super chat, Brian. How deep is our tight end room? Well, it's getting thinner, Don. It was maybe the deepest position on offense with Eric All and Lachey, and I like Steven Stylianos and Addison Estringa, but Estringa's been out as well. It sounds like he's going to be back next week. But boy, they better.
That's kind of what I was thinking. I was going to ask you about Estringa because, as I understood it, he was not far at all from returning.
Yeah, they need him back. I mean, I think he could be a big part in this passing game. They can get him back. Are you surprised that they didn't target Steven Stylianos more on Saturday as the game went on? You would think.
Well, I think they simply, let's face it, we only threw 4 passes in the second half.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And,
is that just lack of confidence in options there, or is that just? Purely.
I think we just felt. I couldn't help but notice there was one conversation that the TV camera showed. It was a fairly lengthy conversation between Kirk and Brian, and it's not hard for me to imagine they were discussing precisely what we're going to do these next 20 minutes. Maybe it was a conversation late third quarter, and we have no idea what was being said. But it wouldn't surprise me if Kirk and Brian were simply discussing, we're gonna play it very conservative from here on out. We're going to require them to beat us. They were confident that Wisconsin was not going to be able to get that done on offense, and they wouldn't have been so confident with that discussion, I'm sure, except our defense was absolutely lights out with how they were playing, and we had a distinct advantage every time we traded punts. So I think they realized we're simply not going to give ourselves any chance to beat ourselves. Having said that, we still had the fumble snap that could have cost us, and thankfully did not. But it was just a classic example of putting our entire faith in our defense and our kicking game. And to the credit of the offense, we knew we were not going to put the ball up in jeopardy. And that did require that we contribute to our effort by grinding out a few first downs in the third and fourth quarter. We got that done, I'll admit, to a modest level. But let's face it, every one of those first downs that was based on 2 or 3 running plays, you're talking about eating up significant minutes off the clock. And we did a good job of shortening the game. I do recall, I know for a fact we outrushed Wisconsin in the fourth quarter, probably not in the third quarter because that's when Allen got most of his yards, as I recall. So to answer your question, I think they were just, hey, this game reminded me so much as I watched it. This game was so much like a game back in 1981. Now, some of our listeners listened 40 years ago, 42 years ago, but so many others did not. But just to remind you, that still is the all-time leader in scoring defense, I believe. And it was a phenomenal effort by us defensively against Wisconsin the other night. But we had that same kind of phenomenal effort back in 81 when we went to the Big House and beat Michigan 9-7. Think about the defensive players on the field that day. We had guys like Andre Tippett, Mark Bortz, Bobby Stoops, Mel Cole, Todd Simonson, Brad Webb, Pat Dean on defense. We had so many, Lou King at corner. We had a lot of outstanding players on defense. And oh, by the way, we had a punter named Reggie Roby, and we had a freshman place kicker that had a freshman year similar to what Drew Stevens had last year. So the parallels are too many to mention. We were not that good on offense. If you wanted to be kind, you would say we had an average offense. That would be to be kind. But one thing we understood very well back in 81, let's do a great job of protecting the ball. If we can grind out first down and protect this lead and help the defense by burning a lot of clock while we're protecting that lead and playing fairly conservatively, certainly for a hidden fry offense, we were pretty conservative. But that was a formula for success back then, very much as it's a formula for success right now for us. Very similar.
Want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Brad Van Meter and his team down at State Farm. Give him a call at 515-256-6480. Again, that's 515-256-6480. They'll help you navigate through the complex world of insurance. And insurance is very important, whether we're talking life insurance, business insurance, maybe it's auto insurance. They've got some really low quotes available right now for auto policies. They recently celebrated their 100th year in business. We're talking about State Farm, the largest auto insurance company in the country. And Brad's got 3 fully licensed team members to help you with whatever your needs are as it relates to insurance. So again, visit him online, bradvanmeter.com, or give him a call, 515-256-6480, 515-256-6480. And also, Iowa Smokehouse. Tasting is believing with better quality snacks for game day or any day. They're sure to satisfy you and your family's snacking needs, whether you're talking about their tender cuts of beef jerky, their meat sticks, even their delicious steak bites. Tasting is believed with Iowa Smokehouse. Use the code Hawkeyes at checkout at iowasmokehouse.com for 15% off your order. And again, when you support Iowa Smokehouse and you use that code Hawkeyes, you're supporting the work being done here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. So we appreciate Iowa Smokehouse. And Don, we've got Trevor on the line to chat with us. Trevor, welcome to the show.
How we doing? Can you hear me?
Doing good, Trevor. I can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. My question is, and it's probably been asked or answered before, but I haven't heard it. People are saying, why Deacon Hill and not Labus? Even if Labus was hurt for however long he was hurt, doesn't he still have much more time in the system than Deacon Hill? And I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but he would still have more time, correct?
Very true. Very true. I think the perception that I've gotten, Trevor, and this has not been something that any of the coaches have told me personally, but from what I've gathered, it seems that maybe Deacon has picked up things faster than Joe ever did. Now, with that being said, Joe has over 2 years under his belt. So
yeah, that's what I don't get. I mean, I can see if it's going remotely well, but it's not. So I don't. That's where it's just kind of like the insanity thing, same thing over and over again.
Remember, Trevor. We went through this with the Spencer Petras era, and
exactly.
They didn't have great options at quarterback during that time period, but Kirk Ferentz has made it clear for the most part he's not interested in making a change at quarterback if they're winning games.
I mean, that is the argument. Like
That's the argument. So
it's a very easy argument when we're 2-4.
Yeah, but Don, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've said it before, Coach, that too much credit is given to a quarterback when they win and too much blame when they lose. And in this case, over the last 2 games, we can't. You can't tell us that Iowa has won these games because of Deacon Hill, right, Coach?
That's correct. Just as you heard me say a year or two ago, we haven't produced our winning record as much because of Spencer's play, but sometimes in spite of Spencer's play. And I'm not trying to beat up on Spencer. He gave us the best effort he could. Why am I saying Spencer?
Well, Petrus.
Yeah, that's right. I'm just at a minute there where I thought, is Spencer his first name? Of course it is. Yeah. And just somehow for a second it didn't sound right, but it is correct. But you heard me say it's not because of Spencer's play. In some cases, it was in spite of his play. And again, it doesn't mean that he wasn't trying to do his best. It's just that some games it didn't really go his way. And it certainly hadn't gone the way of Deacon hoped in the first 2 games he's played either. So that's there's a lot of truth to what you say. I will say this, this is on a slightly different subject, but I want to make the point because it's worth making. Talking about little things making a difference. I want to take you back to a couple of plays. Wisconsin's on the field, 3rd and 1. They're on the plus 13-yard line. They're in position to make a first down and maybe make a touchdown. And you might recall what happened in the early stages of the game. A false start caused by our defensive line shifting to a double eagle alignment. They simply shifted on the play before the ball was snapped and created a false start. And the reason I bring that up, they did it early in the game, and then late in the game they did it again. And the second time it was simply one player, one defensive lineman. I'm not sure who. Let me find it. Here it is, 3rd and 2. 3rd and 2 when they're desperate for another conversion on their part. An Iowa D lineman simply moves from a right-handed stance to a left-handed stance, but he draws the false start again, and he creates 3rd and 7. And believe me, 3rd and 7 is a lot different than 3rd and 2. So I promise you, you hear them referring to it as disconcerting signals. You're not allowed to imitate a snap count, but nothing says that a defensive lineman cannot shift from one alignment to another.
Right.
And simply that quick movement sometimes gets a false start, especially out of an inexperienced lineman. And I suspect the guys that drew the fouls probably didn't have a ton of playing time.
Don, I'm just curious, was my comment earlier and go along with Trevor's comment about Joe Labus. Is there at this point in time with what has been proven to us about how Kirk kind of views the quarterback situation and his emphasis on, kind of playing risk adverse, especially at the quarterback spot. Are you at all surprised that we have not seen Joe Labus at all this year?
Yes, I'm a little bit surprised because, again, you think back to Western Michigan, why in the world wouldn't we give those guys that like the experience at quarterback, why wouldn't we at least give them, one possession apiece?
Well,
thank you.
But to Trevor's point, to Trevor's point, he played in the bowl game and they won that game. So if we're going to go on if we're going to go off the win-loss thing, he is undefeated just like Deacon is. Yeah,
and that's another example. We certainly should not sit here and give Joey Labus credit for that big win over Kentucky because 2/3 of the scoring was done by defense.
Correct.
Right. So, but to the credit of our offensive coaches, they didn't give Joey too many things to do that day. The plays they required him to run are plays he certainly understood thoroughly, and he did not get us beat. He certainly played okay with what we asked him to do. And that's smart. Of course, you don't want to overload a quarterback because that's a recipe for disaster. We all know that.
We also don't know what prep was like during that month, Trevor. So I'm just
correct
throwing this out there. What if prep was just like pulling teeth for Iowa?
And that
You're talking about this fall, you're saying?
No. Well, that could.
Oh, you mean the bowl game?
I could either. Maybe prep for the bowl game was really, really difficult, and it just felt like they were pulling teeth to get Joe to be okay. Does that make sense? I don't. I'm just.
Oh, sure. I mean, there are definitely stuff that we have no idea about, and that's why we can have
the recipe.
But it's
the recipe for the win over Kentucky is exactly what you want. A couple of pick sixes, and now all of a sudden you've got a very comfortable lead. And all you have to do is settle in and go with a very conservative offense and protect a 21-point lead. We're not going to be that fortunate very often, of course. It's not easy to get a 21-point lead against a solid opponent.
Anything else, Trevor?
One more statement. Just a statement, not even a question. Like, it still blows my mind that the coaching staff can be okay with mediocrity on offense and have what I would consider pretty much a championship defense if the offense was also a part of that. Like, that blows my mind that they can say we are who we are. Like, why do we have to be that? We have a defense, obviously. Like, it blows
Trevor,
my mind.
Trevor, you speak for a lot of fans. There's no doubt.
It's just, man. Like,
I agree with you. Trevor. And you and I are on the same page, but there is a segment of the fan base that feels differently than you and I.
That's crazy, because even in those years that we, went 12-0 that with Beathard, our offense wasn't. I mean, it wasn't even halfway. What was it? We're in the 80th range.
Yeah.
So it's not saying we have to have a top 20 offense. It's just that's crazy.
Let me say it this way. The championship teams I've been part of 5 championship teams, 3 at Iowa and 2 at Western Illinois. And in all 5 cases, those teams had an offense and a defense and a kicking game, for that matter, that could pick up the other side of the ball when things didn't go well. Sometimes the offense bailed out the defense. Sometimes it was the other way around. The defense had more to do with the win than the offense. And sometimes the kicking game saved the day. That's what good teams are. Michigan's a prime example. Michigan's good on offense, they're good on defense, and they're also outstanding in the kicking game. That's when you know you have a championship team, when you're good in all aspects.
But some people would have you believe, Trevor, that it's not reasonable for Iowa fans to expect a team in Iowa to be able to compete for national titles.
Yeah, well, that was also before NIL. So now.
This defense was elite, and special teams were elite before NIL.
100%. And now we don't. Now there isn't. I mean, what is the excuse? That's crazy to me.
Yep, I get you.
All right. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Let's go back to our chat. KH says, Coach, do you think Castro did the right thing late after that interception to just take a knee instead of taking it to the house, Don?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll tell you why that's the right thing. I've seen things as crazy as this. I've seen a defensive player running down the field and the ball simply comes out without contact. He simply loses the handle on the ball. We used to tell our guys all the time on offense, if the defense possesses the ball by way of a turnover, then that's a prime opportunity for you to try to get the ball out, because they do not spend any time focusing on ball security. A lot of them don't even know how to carry a football very well. So it's a great opportunity. I'll give you a prime example. There was a running back years ago that played for the Ohio State Buckeyes. They won the national title that day. And the only reason they won it is because the other team had possession of the ball on a turnover, was running down the field, and the freshman running back spiked the ball out of that defender's hands to end the game, to recover. I think it was very late stages of the game. I can't remember the name of that running back. I guarantee Mark remembers because he's an Ohio State fan. But you remember the play, maybe even Corey. National championship game, it was the play of the game. A running back, a freshman no less. Now, I'll admit he was a freshman at the end of his freshman season, but he makes the play of the day. Even though he's a running back, he makes the play of the day by stripping the ball when a defensive player from the other team, and I can't remember who they were playing. They won the national title. Who was it against, Corey? Help me out.
Oh, I have no idea, Don. You're going to have to tell me. This was how long ago?
It was a Jim Tressel team. I do remember that.
Okay. Was it
and the
Florida?
back ended up getting in trouble. I don't even think he finished his career at Ohio State because he got in trouble.
Was it Florida?
but it might have been Florida. I think it was played out. I believe it was played maybe at the Fiesta Bowl, I think. But
Mike says Mike says Miami.
Miami, Florida.
Yep, that's what Mike says in the chat.
Yeah.
Maurice
Maurice
Claret.
Claret. Yes, that's the name. Incredible play on his part. But we used to always remind our offensive players, listen, they've got the ball from us, but here's the good news for us. They don't necessarily know how to carry a football. So if you have any opportunity to get the ball out, then do it. Yeah. And in rare cases, you saw it the other day. There was a play on TV this weekend where the ball was, I think it might have been in the Missouri Valley, where the ball came out and then it was turned back over to the other team. Yeah, it was the game I was doing. What am I thinking? It was Youngstown at South Dakota, and the ball was exchanged hands twice on one play. The defense intercepted, as I recall, and then the return man actually coughed up the ball, and it was recovered by South Dakota all over again. Crazy play, but it happens sometimes.
Don, we're going to get a kind of quick fire on these comments here in the chat.
Okay.
Lemansky says, to quote Erica, Marco is our future. Get him on the field, even for 2 series, for God's sake, or to hand off the ball only in the red zone.
Yeah, it's conceivable we'll be lucky enough with one of these remaining 5 regular season games. Maybe we can put ourselves in position to play those other quarterbacks and give them a chance to be rewarded for all their commitment to the program. And 2 things happen when you play reserve players. 2 things happen. This is not hard for people to believe. Does it improve morale, team morale? Absolutely it does. Even the starters and second team guys, they enjoy seeing those younger players have a chance to play because they know they're the unsung heroes on the team. And let's face it, it improves the morale of the team, both those guys that get to play for the first time maybe all fall, and it improves the morale of the upperclassmen too. And it's a reward for those scout team players that often don't have that opportunity to play. There were games we were lucky enough. We played virtually everybody that was eligible for competition. And it was a wonderful thing when we could do it, because you got to see, in some cases, you saw guys play better than what you could imagine. Now, it was very simple offense and defense, of course, and oftentimes we did get outgained, but it was okay because it was late in the game. I know Coach Brazier used to lament on offense, when you guys put in your subs, you never have to cost us points, typically. With a little bit of luck, we don't turn the ball over at least. And yet, defensively, Coach Fry won't be able to substitute more than what he maybe wanted to. And then when we give up a touchdown, the defense feels badly because maybe they'd only given up 1 touchdown all day, and now all of a sudden the opponent gets 14 rather than 7. Well, in the end, of course, we take pride in our scoring defense. But in the end, there's a value attached to giving those young defensive players a chance to play because they deserve to play just like young offensive players deserve to play too.
Tyler in the chat. Thank you for Lemansky for the super chat. Tyler says, could Brian be put in a reduced role such as O-line coach? I understand that his role as a coordinator is not good. Could he be better going back to his specialty? Well, I don't think we're ever going to find that out because I don't think that's going to happen, Tyler. But could it happen? Well, sure, it could happen. But I think that would, my personal opinion is that would be perceived as a serious demotion, and I just don't see that happening. Jack in the chat says, can we talk about the run game? What made it work so well on Saturday? Don, you talked about it a little bit earlier, but obviously more gap running, and the counter has been a good play for Iowa throughout the year. Has there been anything else besides just a line that's steadily improved?
Well, as you heard me say already, the 82-yard touchdown was a simple ISO play. I don't think we've run very many isolation plays this year. And by that, I mean you need a fullback on the field to do it. A decent lead block for sure by Hayden Large. And then the back hesitated for a second. But then when Leshon decided to go, he went with top speed with as much acceleration as he could muster. And of course, he pulled through an arm tackle and he gave a guy a stiff arm too. Otherwise, you don't run for 82. The back has to get a big chunk of those yards all by himself. And Leshon was able to get that done.
Drew in the chat says, Brian Hartline for OC, boost the offense, needs for new Big Ten and help keep these wide receivers next year. Help recruit stars as well. Help recruit. I can't read today. Help recruit stars too. Drew, thank you for the super chat. And boy, Brian Hartline is a name out there, but he's going to have some opportunities. I've been saying this for a while. He's likely already had some opportunities to leave and go somewhere else, but he's probably going to be in line for a head coaching job somewhere. He's not going to come to Iowa to be the OC. That would be a step down from Ohio State. Don, your thoughts on Brian Hartline?
I guess I wasn't certain. Is Hartline the OC at Ohio State?
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yep, he is.
And
James
gotcha.
wants to know further, Don, how would you fix this offense? That's a loaded question. You've been asked it a number of times, not just on this platform.
Well, in the near term, I would simply challenge the offensive coaches to expand the offense, but in a really intelligent way. Just put a lot of thought into the plays of installing from week to week. You've heard me say, Corey, I don't think there was ever a week that went by that we didn't install something that we had never run before. And obviously we wouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it. We did it because we had a reason behind what we were doing. And it just made us a little tougher to defend. The defense never knew for sure what plays they were going to see. You heard me say too, I mentioned as an example, it would be logical when we were getting ready to play Wisconsin, that we would go back and specifically look hard at Washington State. That game happened a month ago, maybe. But let's face it, Washington State beat Wisconsin. And you're kind of crazy if somebody has some success against an upcoming opponent. You'd be kind of foolish not to consider what they did and whether or not you might be able to do something very similarly. Maybe it's a play you've never run, but if you can see it on film that it looks like it has reason to be run, and you have the personnel that you think can do it, then by all means you should run it. And you've heard me say too, Corey, we might run a specific play in game 2 that had a lot with us winning game 2. We might not run it again until game 7. And the reason we didn't run it in game 3, 4, 5, and 6 is because the team we saw in game 2 was very similar structurally to the team we were seeing in game 7. That's what you do in football. You think outside the box as best you can. The only limitation you really have is how many hours there are in the day. And you've heard me say it's a race against the clock. You got to be productive as you can be to come up with a game plan that reflects imagination and that reflects sound planning. And that's well thought out. I certainly would expect the same thing out of our defense. And Phil Parker has shown. Let me give you a specific example of something Phil, to my knowledge, it might be the first time all year we did it, but you heard me say going in, one of the problems I have with Mordecai, the guy's a good runner to the point where they might even run Q draw. And sure enough, I think it was 3rd and 7, as I recall, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, pretty early in the game. They do run Q draw, and guess who made the play? It was Schulte, but he didn't make it as a deep safety. He rotated down into position of a linebacker, and he was the guy that was responsible for spying the quarterback. He was specifically rotating down into that alignment, that linebacker alignment, right after the snap, because his job was simply to spy on the quarterback. And it was a perfect call because, sure enough, they ran Q draw, and now the guy that bumps Mordecai out of bounds for a gain of 2 is Schulte, the guy that was spying on him to begin with. That's smart football. I don't know that we've run that particular look defensively any time at all this season other than what we did against Wisconsin. Obviously, you're not going to run against a team that doesn't have a running quarterback, and we haven't really seen very many running quarterbacks so far. But that's smart football. I give the defense credit for being prepared to spy a quarterback that is a very potential runner.
Don Lewansky wants to know if Ron Olenzak was the pooch punter with Reggie Roby.
I can't remember who the pooch punter was. It certainly might have been Lonnie. I can't recall for sure. Maybe I'm even wrong to think he was a pooch punter, but I think if you go back and look at those 1981 stats, I'm pretty sure we had another punter. And his average is nowhere at all near Reggie's 49.8. So I can't remember who the punter was. That's terrible, but that's called That's called old age, I guess. You forget things that happened 42 years ago.
Brian in the chat says, hi, Coach and Corey. With the way we're playing on offense, why not go all in with the wing T or wishbone? Something similar. Difficult transition, question mark? Thank you for the super chat,
Yes.
Brian. Would that be a big change, Don, to do that
Yes.
mid-season?
It would. All we're talking about doing here, getting ready for game 8, is simply a wrinkle or two. Just a play or 2 or 3. But it can have good effect. I'll give you an example of a play that hurt us from Wisconsin's standpoint. Now, maybe they've been running it all season, but I'm not sure that they've ever run it. They ran a shovel pass to the back. Remember that?
Yeah.
The first time it was for pretty good yardage, too. They ran it a second time. The second time we played it a lot better. But they did run it twice, and I'd never seen them run it before. Maybe they had, and I certainly hadn't seen all their video. But the fact that it worked the first time, it wouldn't surprise me if our defense was able to say, that's the first time we've seen the shovel. But they ran it, and they ran it with good effect.
By the way, to the person in the chat that I put in a timeout, I didn't like to have to deal with the kids on Saturday. I don't have to deal with kids in the chat tonight. So please treat people with respect. And you get the timeout and then you got to be banned, and I don't want to do that. So anyways, KH in the chat, any word on Noah yet? Nothing. We'll probably get some. Well, I'm sure it'll be asked tomorrow at the press conference with Kirk. I believe it's a 1:45 p.m. press conference.
Yeah, I heard somewhere, Corey, and maybe it's not factual at all, but I heard some mention that he wasn't actually going to get to compete in a game until the first weekend in November. I hope that's not true, but
that's been out there. That number's been out there.
Yeah,
but we'll see if
it might be true. He's at least allowed to practice. We know that, and of course that means that at the very least, if he's not able to show up on the game field until November, he'll be more than prepared to do it.
Dave says, how many good offenses has Iowa faced? Well, Iowa State's look like a decent offense now. I don't know that they were week 2. I think Utah State.
we got the quarterback awfully early in his career, didn't we, when we played him?
Yeah, I think Utah State was a decent offense in the Mountain West level. Certainly Penn State's a very good offense. I don't think Purdue's a great offense.
I'd say we've only played one really exceptional offense, and that'd be Penn State.
Cardi G says, classic letdown spot this weekend against Minnesota. Everyone's talking about Iowa going to Indy. Reality check. We are the worst FBS offense. Well, that's true, and it is it's a potential letdown game, but given who Kirk is and how he coaches, Don, I think the guys will be ready this Saturday. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I think so too, Corey. I did mention, honestly, I thought our level of performance on defense was just, I realize it's not a great Wisconsin team. I'm not suggesting that it is, but I just thought, it reminded me of an inspired effort back in 1981. Those guys have been knocked around in before we got here, certainly, and even in 79 and 80, we hadn't quite gotten over the hump in those first 2 years. But in year 3, those guys were ready. They paid their price. They were typically 4th and 5th year players, and they were on a mission when they played back in 81. And I felt our guys against Wisconsin were on that same kind of mission. I saw an exceptional effort on the part of all kinds of players. And let's face it, when you have a guy like Castro playing like he was, man, that is inspiring to your teammates. So it's kind of logical that they might think, if Castro can make that many great plays, I think I'm going to find a way to make a few myself. So it really is contagious. I used to say that about Eddie Hartwell. And for that matter, here's a prime example that our Bear fans are familiar with. Eddie Hartwell played for me at Western and was a great player for the Ravens back when he and what was that other great linebacker that played for the Ravens then? I can't remember his name. Here's one that's more contemporary. I'm sorry, what was the linebacker?
Ray Lewis.
Ray Lewis, yes. Ray Lewis one time in a Pro Bowl said, I got to give credit to my teammate. The reason I'm in the Pro Bowl every year is because of Eddie Hartwell, the other linebacker. It's a little bit like Jack and Seth last year. Seth played a prominent role, and Jack was always quick to give credit to Seth for how well he played. But here's another example, a great example. If you're a Bear fan, you remember this. How about a guy named Khalil Mack that came to the Bears as a young player? And the Bears, a lot of the Bears defenders thought they were playing hard, until they saw Khalil Mack for how he played. And he actually shamed some of those professional football players into playing better than what they thought they could play. An inspired effort on the part of one player can do that. And I would suggest that Castro had something to do with that on Saturday night. Some of our other guys were playing out of their minds too. It was a really inspired effort. Now, here's what I was going to mention. I'd like to finish off the night mentioning this, Corey. You're familiar. You've heard me talk about our inspired play at Western Illinois when we played LSU. LSU won the national title that year, I'll remind you. And after the game, I thought it was such a meaningful thing. After the game, I got a lot of nice notes from Western Illinois fans, but I got even more complimentary messages from LSU fans. And the basis for those messages was this kind of comment. I've been an LSU fan for 50 years, 60 years, whatever the case might be. And that's the most inspired opposition I've ever seen. What an incredible compliment to pay a football team, an FCS football team playing on a big stage. And I thought my first reaction was, I'm going to share these with the players. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that because, my gosh, if I read some of these text messages and emails, I don't even know if these guys will be able to fit their head through the door because it might be a problem that it goes to their head, that they think they just have to show up from now on. And so what I did, we had a lesser opponent, an FCS opponent the next weekend, and I won't embarrass them by naming who they were, but it was a team that was not as good as we were, not nearly as good as LSU. And what I did do, I read some of those messages to the team Friday night before the Saturday game with the FCS opponent that followed LSU. And I said, the reason I'm sharing these messages with you now, and I didn't share them with you early in the week because I knew we might not have a good preparation for this game. I'm sharing them with you now because all I'm asking you to do, can you match that same enthusiasm, that same effort against this team that you used a week ago against LSU? And if you can do that, then it's going to be a one-sided game. That game, Corey, was 42-0 at the half. And so I think it's safe to say if the guys didn't match that effort we had against LSU, they certainly tried to. And they got a great result. So the reason I share that story with you, my request of our football team is show up with the same effort for Minnesota that you had for Wisconsin. If you do that, I have great confidence that we're going to win another game.
Lemansky with the super chat. Thank you, Lemansky. Says Don. Norm Granger, fullback, played for Cowboys. Greatest guy, memories?
Absolutely, and he was good with the ball under his arm, too. We recruited fullbacks that you had to be explosive to be an effective blocker, of course, but every now and then, we shared the football with our fullbacks. One of our good short yardage plays was what we called F-scoop. It was simply a fullback dive, and let's face it, he's lined up so close to the quarterback, that's a quick handoff, and the ball's across the line of scrimmage in no time at all. An ideal call for third and short because it's a guy that's pounding up in there that of course, gets to the line of scrimmage quicker than any R-back ever could out of the eye. So we also ran inside traps with fullbacks. We ran draw plays with fullbacks because sometimes we'd be in split backs and we'd confuse the defense by sometimes giving the ball to the fullback and giving the R-back a chance to lead for him. Let's face it, Owen Gill was a pretty good lead blocker also. He was a running back, a lot like the guy from Wisconsin last Saturday. Wasn't any imagination required that Braylon Allen might be a good lead blocker too, because he was big like Nick Bell. And of course, Nick Bell could be a lead blocker for the fullback because the fullback wasn't quite as big as our running back anyway.
Dennis wants to know what happened to Y.A. Black at the end of the game. Obviously, he got dinged up. Hopefully, he's okay because I think he's playing the best football of his career, Don. I think he's going to end up on some draft boards because of his size. I've just been impressed with what he's given Iowa right now.
Yeah, you've heard his name a lot by the public address announcer or by the TV announcer. It's not easy to be in on a lot of plays when you're a D lineman because let's face it, there are certain times when you got to deal with not one blocker but two. And at least for the early stages of the play, you're double teamed sometimes to that next level. And your only goal, of course, is to try to keep that linebacker clean. You're trying to absorb both blockers. That's why you infrequently see a call of defensive holding, and that's a smart D lineman that's trying to tie up two blockers, knowing that he needs to be able to try to keep his linebacker free to run to the ball.
Jack says, Corey, if Barta didn't want the 25 point per game thing released, how did it end up in a public contract? I wish I could talk more on that, but I just can't. But I'm just telling you, for those of you that don't understand why that would be made public, I'm just telling you, based on my understanding of the situation, it was not Gary Barta's intent initially to make it public. Now, I think Gary Barta's him doing that in the first place, this whole stipulation is ridiculous. So I think on both sides, right? I think it's ridiculous from every angle. And Gary is just as at fault as anyone else for not making an actual adjustment or change, but instead putting together this ridiculous 25 point per game thing. I'm simply saying the fact that it was made public and sent out in a release was not necessarily what Gary wanted initially, from what I have been told. Brandon says, Coach, why did they stop using Braylon Allen in the third quarter? He was having success. Start of that second half. What was different about what they were doing first half to second half in the run game, Don, and how did Iowa adjust?
To be honest with you, I don't know that their play selection really changed much at all. They're a pretty basic rushing attack, I think. A lot of the plays they run are plays that are very similar to the ones we run. It was simply a question of not dialing up his number as much, especially in the first half. But that third quarter, I don't know how many carries he got in the third quarter. He ended up, I believe, with 17 or 18 carries. Let's face it, a stat that usually does not go the way of the Wisconsin opponent would be rushing attempts. Incidentally, rushing attempts is a good stat to have on your side. And do you want to guess who had the most rushing attempts? I think you know the answer to that. It's Iowa by a considerable margin.
Rushing attempts?
Yeah, let me be sure of that. Yes, we run rushing attempts. Just to give you an idea of how the analytics turned out, if you look at the top 15 analytics, we won 8 of them. Wisconsin won 6 of them. But to go one step further, the top 6 parameters, we won 4 of the 6. So the ones we won had a little more value than the ones that Wisconsin won.
Hawkeye guy in the chat. Saw you after the game on Saturday. So glad we got that win. Amen to that. And it is always, by the way, anybody who ever comes up to me and says, hey, I enjoyed the show, thanks for doing it. It does mean something, especially if we're, I know Sunday at the crossover at Kinnick, had a couple of people do that. I do appreciate that. And it makes, kind of revalidates the work that's been put into the channel, even if it doesn't seem that way. At the moment, you got a crowd of people and you're trying to get through traffic. But I do appreciate that, Hawkeye guy. Thank you for being a part of the show here. And let's see, Scott says, how much did the Tanner Mordecai injury factor into our defensive success against Wisconsin? Don, they were struggling, I thought, more with Tanner when he was in there. I thought the game simplified a bit for Wisconsin in that third quarter without Tanner. And that was when they had the most success.
You're right. You're right about that. Pat Hardy disagreed with me a little bit. I made the comment. I listed that as one of the huge plays in the game was Mordecai being injured. Pat responded. Pat said the same thing basically you did. You said I didn't see that much difference in their efficiency in moving the ball, and I think you're right. For some odd reason, they threw 14 in the first 17 snaps they had.
Right.
With just modest success, I'd say. They hit some, they missed some. But I still feel going forward, it would have been a harder game to win if Mordecai would have played the whole game.
Yeah.
Because let's not forget, that guy is throwing for 9,000 yards. I mean, he's an experienced quarterback, and he's a more capable runner. The backup, I thought, certainly did okay for limited experience that he has.
But
he's undersized. He's not the threat to run that Mordecai is. Let's not forget, Green did beat our best corner over the top for a gain of 44 yards, too. And I know you could argue that that was offensive interference because he did, in fact, push off of Cooper's helmet. But they give him nowadays, they give him a chance to jostle back and forth a little bit, and the guy got by with it. Of course, if he's playing at home, it doesn't surprise me that it might not get called.
And real quick, it just because I thought play calling was simplified for Wisconsin in the third quarter to their advantage. I thought they tried to do too much with Tanner's arm in that first half and kind of played into Iowa's hands. When they gave the ball to Braylon Allen in the third quarter, they played better.
Yeah, they were more meat and potatoes in that third quarter, and that's the most efficient quarter they had.
Right.
And thankfully, our defense dug in and held them to a field goal. Let's face it, even if one of those two field goal drives would have produced a touchdown, the end of the game could play out entirely differently.
Yeah.
I think people lose sight of the fact how big those two field goals were. We're up 7-6. Even a field goal wins for Wisconsin. And then that 48-yarder goes through, and now all of a sudden a field goal is not going to do it. So we go from 7-6 to 10-6. That's significant. The safety, frankly, didn't change things much at all because we go from up by 4 to up by 6. Well, they were going to have to score a touchdown in either case. And, of course, a PAT would give them a win. So even though the safety didn't change the scoring factor so much, the fact that the safety was followed by another field goal, that changed everything because 9 points, as you know, is a two-score game.
Craig in the chat says, given all the key essential players who were down with injury, people need to forget about Brian for now and acknowledge that being 6-1 signifies Coach of the Year level coaching by Kirk Ferentz. Cyhawk C Money. PJ was very complimentary on Iowa's run blocking. Don, what is unique or what do you see as the strengths of Iowa's blocking technique? Is there a fundamental technique unique to Iowa? Don, it comes back to the what you said earlier. They've ran a little bit more gap scheme this year, it seems like, and maybe that's the John Budmeyer influence. And I think they have the backs with LaShawn and Jazz Patterson to do that and be successful with that downhill running.
Yeah, maybe gap schemes are a little more suitable for us than zone blocking schemes. We're still going to run zone concepts too. You can bet on that. But we'll pick and choose. I'm sure some weeks it'll be a higher blend of zone plays, maybe a lesser blend of gap schemes or ISO schemes is another example. But I don't want to suggest that one is clearly a better way to go than the others. It does tie a little bit into the skills of the people up front, but it's still fundamentally moving a guy against his will, and there's no shortcuts to getting that done. It's all about pad level. It's all about driving your legs. It's all about hand placement. I'm no expert on offensive line play, but I do know that Kirk Ferentz is, Brian Ferentz is, and George Barnett also is. And so those guys are getting well coached, and they're certainly taking their responsibilities very seriously. And I guess you probably noticed, typically when we claim one of those traveling trophies, invariably there are a lot of big uglies that get that trophy. And I think the skill guys are more than okay with that because they're smart enough to know that we're not going to get the job done very well unless we have a lot of help out of our offensive and defensive lines.
All right, Don, last few questions here. We're going to go rapid fire. Brandon says, do you see us dialing up more pressure on the quarterback in general going forward?
I think it depends a lot on, let's not forget the comment we heard years ago from Miami's defensive coordinator. I asked him where all the man defense went to, the pressure looks, and he said, we're crazy to do that. You got too many man beaters. So obviously, Phil's not going to dial up a bunch of man stuff unless he's comfortable that we're not going to get sliced and diced with man concepts. Some teams do check, other teams do not. You better have a veteran quarterback if you're going to be checking off a lot in the course of the game. So if we're not too worried about a young quarterback changing plays, you can bet that Phil's going to be a little more inclined to go with some pressure looks here and there. But Phil's also smart enough to know one of the best things we do is keep 11 sets of eyes on the quarterback, on the football, and have good leverage on the ball. Be able to have not one tackler but two that's closing in on the ball carrier.
never give a back a two-way go. If we can avoid that, always have him sandwiched in between two of our tacklers. That's what zone concepts are all about. That's why we only given up 10 plays, 20 yards or more after 7 games. And I believe that that's probably still the lowest in the country. It was advertised the other day, our 9 plays through 6 games was tied with someone, I can't remember who, as the lowest figure in the country. And we only gave up 1 on Saturday, so I suspect we're still in the lead or tied for that same position of giving up the fewest possible explosive plays.
Bryce with the super chat. Thank you, Bryce. Says, what's Iowa's toughest game left? Rutgers, potentially? Well, that's a home game. I'll say Nebraska on the road because you just don't know what Nebraska is going to look like late in November. But Rutgers is a challenge.
I think I'm impressed with Rutgers because they've got one thing in common with Iowa. They typically do not beat themselves.
True.
You have to go out and beat them. And, of course, Michigan was good enough to do that. Even that score was a little misleading because Michigan, let's not forget, did have a 95-yard. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. That was Wisconsin. They had the 95-yard pick six, wasn't it? I'm getting the 2 games mixed up. My mistake. But that's a good example, too. One of the reasons Wisconsin won a 95-yard kick return, let's face it, that's not just a 7-point play. That's either a 10 or a 14-point play because the odds are Rutgers would have scored on that possession since they were already inside the 10. So I think Greg Shannon's a good coach. Rutgers does not turn the ball over much. They play sound defense. I don't think they're kicking game, certainly in our league. But as I recall, they do have an explosive return man. It won't be an easy game because they're going to make us beat them. They're not going to show up and shoot themselves in the foot. And you've heard me very complimentary about Matt Rule. I know Matt pretty well. I actually coached against him when I was at UConn. Outstanding coach. He'll have Nebraska getting better, I think, over the last half of the season. Let's face it, they're looking forward to being bowl eligible too. They're 3-3, and they have some games certainly that they know they can win up ahead. And I think those two are probably going to be more difficult games. But having said that, you and I both know this, Corey. We can't take anything for granted. If Minnesota was guilty of anything and losing to Northwestern, I'm sure at least there were some Minnesota players that thought it was going to come easy against Northwestern. It doesn't work that way in the Big Ten. You got to get ready for everyone. And our guys, I think, are smart enough to know that. And our coaches are going to do a good job of pointing out scores every weekend that nobody saw coming. Southern Cal thought they could show up and put a whipping on Notre Dame too, and it doesn't happen that way. You respect your opponent. You never fear them, but you better respect them because otherwise you're likely to get bitten in the butt.
And along the same lines, Cyhawk C Money says the same thing. Rutgers plays a physical style of football. They do not beat themselves, and they do have a playmaker at quarterback. He's not been great at times, but Gavin Wimsatt is a playmaker. Doc P brings up Isaac Tisla, Arkansas. Last I checked, he was playing a little bit, and Kevin Casper's kid is playing a little bit out at Oregon. But actually, I don't know about that one. I'm not sure that he's playing. But why in the world right now? Why would any receiver transfer to Iowa? What would be the attraction? You have a guy like Caleb Brown who hasn't gotten a single catch this year. It's just It's just insane. Anyways, Eric in the chat.
I do understand, Corey, that he was dressed and was at the game, and somebody even commented that he was in a celebratory mood after the game with the Heartland Trophy.
Eric with the super chat. Thank you, Eric. Kudos, last caller. How anyone defends Kirk at this point blows my mind as well. Wait until the expansion. This will not work. Well, that's the other side of this argument, that winning this way is kind of a Band-Aid, but they can get to 10-2, 11-1 winning this way. And I've said that since January. I didn't know about all these injuries were going to happen, but we've said that since January. Down with the schedule, they're going to be able to get by with a subpar to bad offense. But I do question that moving forward. And Lemansky says, yes, Seth is very underutilized. Thank you for the super chat, Lemansky. Tyler wants to know, will you be at the Minnesota game this weekend. I will not. I don't have plans to be there this weekend. Don, are you going to be at Kinnick?
I will be at the game. I have no Missouri Valley responsibilities this weekend. And in that regard, Corey, I'll be ready to join you no more than an hour after the game.
And Don and I were both at the crossover at Kinnick on Sunday, so that was a fun event. Don, just some thoughts on the crossover?
You know, it was a lot of fun to be there and to be part of the crowd. I know Lisa didn't want to miss it because, of course, as a female, you know, she appreciates female athletics certainly, and I enjoy watching our women's basketball team play just as much or more than the men. I enjoy watching them both play. So we wanted to be there, and I thought one of the neatest things about it, Corey, you probably noticed the same thing. As the game wound down, the last minute or two of the game, I made a point of looking to see, are people leaving for the exits? And the answer to that is no, they were not. They did not want to leave early. After the game, I jokingly said to Lisa, I said, I'm sorry, dear, we have to leave now. The game's over. And the point is, nobody wanted to leave. It was a special event. Everybody just wanted to kind of soak up the last minute of that game, and they stuck around to hear what Lisa had to say after the game. Incidentally, I'm excited about our women's team for what they can accomplish. I give Caitlin a lot of credit for just letting the game come to her. She didn't try to force the issue. She makes it look so easy. She's got 34 points, and it seems like she wasn't hardly trying. But she also, of course, had double-digit assists and double-digit rebounds.
Don, do you realize they were shooting like 40? They missed like 7 free throws or something crazy in like the first quarter, and like made 1 3, and yet they still had 24 points in the first quarter.
Yeah, they were doing a great job of feeding the ball inside, oftentimes over the top of the defense on break opportunities. And they just had a lot of high percentage shots. We didn't shoot that well from the perimeter, that's obvious. But in our defense, that win was not easy to figure from 1 minute to the next. So
shooting from the perimeter was not going to be easy in Kinnick.
Yeah, I do believe, let's face it, that ball fits through the hoop, but there's not a whole lot of margin for error. And a gust of wind certainly might throw it off enough to make it miss.
Yeah, there was at least 1 or 2 air balls that I think were largely affected by the wind. Troy says the students come in single file at Camp Randall because some students died from being trampled years ago. I heard that from Tom on Saturday, and I didn't know that. I guess what I don't understand is if that's fine, and that's probably a good thing, you know, especially if we're talking about a safety concern. But if the students know that, why would you not get there early enough so that you can get through that single file line? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. Tyler says, do you honestly think Brian will be gone if we go 11-1? He misses the 25 point per game metric. I'll say he's gone, but I don't think he's going to be fired. I don't know what that means. We'll see what happens. I'm intrigued to see what happens with Bill Belichick at New England right now, Don. 1-5. Maybe he gets canned at New England and gets hired somewhere else and is looking for coaches. Is that possible?
Maybe he could be a special assistant at Iowa. Maybe that's a good place for him.
there you go, Don. Bill Belichick. Tacoon, what are Coach Don's thoughts on trying to get Ryan Grubb from Washington when Kirk hangs it up? That's the #1 offense in the country, Don, and he is from Iowa.
Well, you mean to get him as the head coach?
Yes, I think he's talking about a replacement for
yeah, I'd be hard pressed to get him as a coordinator, I think, because somebody's going to hire him as a head coach. Let me say one other comment about the crossover at Kinnick. You know, to me, one of the neatest things about being there was observing all the girls that were 4, 5, 6, and 7 years old that were at the game, and you could tell they were just so excited about the opportunity to witness that, to be part of that. And maybe they've even had a chance, at the very least, of course, they've watched our women play on TV. But I found myself wondering how many of those 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-old girls are going to end up as really accomplished basketball players, even in college. And it all started with them falling in love with Iowa women's basketball. I think any number of them, it's going to work out that way for them because they're never going to forget the crossover in Kinnick because it was a special moment in a young life. In so many cases, I think that's true.
One final shout out to our sponsor, RTI Threads. We appreciate them sponsoring the show throughout the year. Check out their official Cooper DeJean merchandise at cd3lacesup.com. And boy, that sweatshirt, Cooper DeJean sweatshirt, kept me warm in a cool Camp Randall Stadium on Saturday. And they've got a lot of products from Cooper. And get them while they're hot, get them while they're here, because they're flying off the shelves. And, of course, RTI Threads also has merchandise for Zach Lutmer, Carson Shire, Aiden Hall, Hawkeye Stars of the Future. Visit rtithreads.com. Their NIL roster continues to grow, and they're an Iowa company. We appreciate RTI Threads. Again, cd3lacesup.com for Cooper DeJean merch. All right, Don, let's talk final thoughts here on Minnesota. The Hawks taking on the Gophers in the Floyd of Rosedale. And actually, before we get that, I want to make sure we get this. We had a comment on the text line. And appreciate anybody. We don't have a lot of people that reach out to us via text, but you can do that, and we'll try to get the comment on the air. Our user over the text line texted in and says, I'm becoming concerned about the play of Xavier Wampa, lack of physicality and tackling, as well as the routes he takes on coverage. Enjoy your show, Iowa fan from Missouri. Thank you for that comment. Don, your thoughts on what we've seen from Xavier Wampa thus far?
Well, there was a game. It might have been Michigan State a couple of weeks ago. It concerned me because Xavier missed several tackles. And, it's a tricky position to play. The tricky part about open field tackles, yeah, you'd like to blow up a guy every chance you get. But the reality is, Bill Brazier used to say, you don't have to light the guy up. But what you do have to do is get him on the ground. So you don't want to be too much out of control, because you're going to miss a few times if you get out of control. We had a rule in start blocking DBs downfield. If he's under control, you better get under control. Meaning, if he's chopping his feet as he's supporting toward the ball, you better start chopping your feet too, because you have to be able to engage him. And you can't, make a real aggressive attempt to block him and whiff, just like you can't whiff as a tackler either. So maybe that's been coached out of him. I don't recall it was such a problem against Wisconsin. Xavier didn't have too many chances to tackle. I don't know what his final stats were, but I did see the guy that really stood out as an open field tackler was Castro. And I guess you could argue that Schulte struggled at least. This was a game where he struggled more with the missed tackles than I believe in Xavier did. Now, maybe it's simply because he didn't have to line up Braylon Allen one-on-one in the open field as often as Schulte did, because Braylon Allen can make anybody look bad from time to time. But knowing how Phil Parker coaches in the back end, I know this for sure. Xavier's getting great coaching. I did see one instance on the sideline where Phil was talking specifically to Xavier, and it wasn't just about him on the back. It was some kind of constructive criticism, I'm sure. But Xavier understands, my coach is not out here to be my best buddy. He's out here to make me a better football player. So if I deserve some constructive criticism, I'm going to hear it. And I'm sure that Phil was happy to let him know what he was doing wrong. Not happy, of course not happy, but he knows that's his job to do. And we always make sure players understand that. Listen, if we correct you, it's not because we're trying to embarrass you. It's because we're trying to enable you to be the best possible player you can possibly be. We know that's what you want, and we know that's what we want for you to have. And so understand we're here to help you, not to criticize you. So if we're offering criticism, please realize it is what it is. It's constructive criticism. It's a correction. It's designed to help you to become a better player.
All right, Don, Iowa, Minnesota, Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central Time. Kick in BC. Battle for the Floyd of Rosedale. It'd be Iowa's third trophy they get this year. Of course, they've had this trophy for seems like the last decade. PJ Fleck has not had much success against Iowa, and his team is down right now. What does Iowa need to avoid? What does Iowa need to do to avoid a down performance coming off a big win on the road?
I would say this. It's typically this for us, whether we're home or away. Need to start fast. We're not good at playing from behind. I don't care if we're in Kinnick. We're still not good at playing from behind. So let's hope that we don't have to do that. And let's never lose sight of the fact, if you're the underdog, understand this. If you allow them to play with any kind of lead, at some point you will get a fanatical effort out of them. because they might have started the game not expecting that they could win it, but now you've emboldened them by giving them a chance to play from in front. And at that point, you're going to see a fanatical effort out of a team that hasn't been able to win many football games. So that would certainly apply to Minnesota. If they're able to get off to a good start, we're going to see a fanatical effort out of the Gophers. We don't need that. We need to try to discourage them as early and as often as we can.
And what does Iowa do, Don, that has made this such a one-sided series since PJ took over?
Well, last year's game's a pretty good example. We've beaten them with non-traditional touchdowns, sometimes special team touchdowns, sometimes defensive scores. We've beaten them with turnovers. Was it last year or 2 years ago? They outrushed us by 200 yards. I think it was last year. How many guys named you beat someone that outrushes you by 200?
Actually, this is an interesting. It's funny you bring that up. It was the last 2 years. If you go back and look at your analytics from the last 2 years, I believe the numbers, the analytics say that Iowa should have lost both of those games. They found a way to win both of those games. 2 years ago is Alex Padilla that won that game behind a bad stat line. And then last year, of course, we know Mo Ibrahim went off on Iowa, and the Hawks found a way to win.
Yeah, we know that turnovers always make a difference. I'd be willing to bet if you looked at those last 2 years, we probably beat them on turnovers both years. It's just difficult to win when the other team outrushes you by a huge number. It hardly ever happens. And the prime example, usually if you outrush an opponent by 100 yards in the Big Ten, I'd be willing to bet you over the last 20 years, Corey, if you outrush someone by 100 yards, you win at least 85% of the time, maybe 90. 200 yards for sure is in the 90s. It simply doesn't happen. You got to be lucky to pull it off. And last year we were lucky, and for that matter, Minnesota beat Northwestern in all kinds of statistical areas and still managed to lose. So the good news, you heard me say even for the Wisconsin game, Corey, we don't have to outrush Wisconsin to beat them, but the numbers have to be at least competitive. I'd say the same thing regarding Minnesota. Now, this team is different than their recent teams, but we don't have to outrush Minnesota to beat them. It would help if we would do that, obviously, because frankly, we should outrush them because our rush defense appears to be better than theirs, and maybe our rush offense is even better than theirs. So
that we haven't said. When's the last time we've said that about Iowa, Minnesota?
Yeah. So there's all kinds of reasons we should win this game, but it all starts with us not beating ourselves, something we almost always accomplish. But I said almost always. Our goal is to never let it happen any other way. And there have been a few games in recent years where we were able to shoot ourselves in the foot. I hope this team is smart enough to know that and smart enough to take steps to never let it happen again.
Iowa, Minnesota, Saturday, 2:30 p.m. Central Time. Erica wants to know, final super chat, final chat of the day. Can Don tell us a Hayden Fry story before we go? Or let me finish the question for Erica. Can Don tell us a Hayden Fry story before we go to bed?
Oh, gosh, one that relates to the Gophers?
Oh, just a Hayden Fry story in general, Don.
In general, gosh, I hardly know where to start. I know since we were talking about playing different quarterbacks, I remember we're getting ready to play the Kickoff Classic. It's the only game on TV that day. It's played in the Meadowlands. And, of course, here we are saying, I don't know if we said it before the game or not, but we knew what the plan was. I don't know if Coach let Tennessee know what the plan was, but 3 quarterbacks played that day. Everybody remembers Dan McGuire because, as Hayden said, he could throw a football through a car wash and the ball would never even get wet. That's how hard he could throw a football. But as you already know, it's not. You don't measure a passer by passing velocity because that's not as important as accuracy or being able to pick the right receiver. So McGuire played the first 20 minutes. Then a guy named Tom Mahoski that came in. Incidentally, Tom Mahoski Jr. is on our football team right now. And I know I'm happy to see Tommy on the practice field because I asked him the other day, am I okay to call you Tommy? Because that's what I always called your dad. And he said, absolutely, Coach. I'd be honored if you'd call me Tommy, because one reason I'm here is because my dad had a great experience at Iowa. And then last but not least, the guy that played the last 20 minutes of the game was the guy that was named Chuck Hartley. He was only the third quarterback on that day. And you might recall he made a play that really ultimately ended up costing us. We were down the goal line. It was a fourth down play. It was an option play. And he knew he was about to go down with the football. So he made, in many ways, a very logical thought process. His thought process was, I can't score. Maybe the pitchman can score. He pitched late to the pitchman. The ball was intercepted by Tennessee. It went 98 or 99 yards the other way. I don't recall for sure that it was the difference in the game, but obviously it had a huge impact on the game. But the rest of that story, maybe within the next 3 weeks or so, Chuck Hartley became our starting quarterback and ended up, of course, I believe, as a 2-time All-Big Ten quarterback. So one reason Chuck was able to earn that job is because he was given a chance to prove in games that he was better than the other two. And that's the opportunity I'm sure that Joey Labus and Marco Linez would love to have sometime over the rest of the season. They're probably not going to get that opportunity, of course, but I'm sure they'd love to have that chance. And it's easier to do it in game 1, of course, than it is in game 8.
And Tommy Paholski.
And Tommy Paholski. Tommy realizes he's not going to get that opportunity anytime soon because he's even further down the depth chart than the other two.
Yep. Coach John Patterson here, Iowa Postgame with Coach John Patterson. We've spent about 3 hours talking Iowa, Wisconsin. I spent a couple hours Saturday talking Iowa, Wisconsin. It's been a long weekend. I feel like the weekend's not quite over because today's been a long day. But, Don, it's always good to finish it off with you. And we'll talk to you after Iowa, Minnesota. You'll be in Kinnick, and we'll be here live following the game, hopefully talking about a 7-1 start and a Floyd of Rosedale trophy remaining in the great city of Iowa City. So, Don, we'll look forward to it.
Let me say one last thing for you, in representing both you and I. I'm very grateful to our listeners for caring so much about listening to this show. My apologies, and I know your apologies have already been offered up on the fact that we had some technical glitches in the start of the whole thing, but our listenership was patient enough to wait for us to come on the air, and the least we can do, I know you feel the same way I do, the least we can do is patiently field calls that they'd like to pass along to us, and we appreciate the teamwork that we have from our listenership, and we're grateful for it, and we look forward to many more opportunities to talk Iowa football, something we all know and love.
Absolutely. As Lemansky says in the chat, let's go get that pig, Don.
We got to get Floyd back. Yep. There's more lyrics to that. Bill Brazier wrote a song about Floyd. I'll share it with you, but I cannot share it on the air.
Okay. Sounds good. All right, folks. For Coach Don Patterson, I'm Corey Brada. Stay tuned to the channel all week long. We'll have some women's basketball coverage for you as we count down the days to basketball season. And, of course, football coverage. And then myself and Mark Rogers will be live tomorrow, 4:30 p.m. Central Time over at his channel, Iowa Football, at the voice of college football. Have a great night.